There is a version of The Simpsons that most people have never actually watched. Not a different show, not a lost episode. The exact same episodes that have been airing since December of 1989, sitting on streaming services right now, playing on cable reruns at 2 in the morning in living rooms where somebody fell asleep and left the television on. The exact same episodes you have seen dozens of times. Episodes so familiar that you can hear a single line of dialogue and know exactly what is about to happen next. Know the expression on Homer's face before it appears. Know the joke before it lands. But there is a layer to this show that operates completely independently of the jokes, the storylines, and the characters moving around in the foreground. A layer that was placed there deliberately by artists and writers and prop designers who understood that the audience would never stop watching, that someday people would have the ability to pause and zoom and scrub through individual frames at their own pace, and that when they did, they deserved to find something worth discovering. That layer is the background of Springfield. And tonight, we are going to spend a long, quiet, unhurried evening inside it. Before we go any further, take a moment to settle in. Get comfortable wherever you are. Adjust the pillow. Dim the screen if you want it dimmer. Let your body relax into whatever position it wants to be in. There is no rush here. This is the kind of content that rewards the relaxed mind more than the alert one. The kind of accumulated detail that comes to you best when you are not trying too hard to receive it. Let it come to you. That is the only instruction. Let us begin with the Quick E-Mart, because the Quick E-Mart is Springfield's richest single location for background detail, and it is a good place to establish the principle that governs everything we will discuss tonight. In a 1994 episode called Homer and Apu, there is a scene inside the store where Homer is browsing the shelves. It lasts approximately 4 seconds. The camera passes over a rack of products in the background, products that most viewers would not consciously process, because the meaningful action is happening in the foreground, and your visual attention follows what is moving and speaking. But if you pause on the right frame of that scene, if you look at the labels on the products on those shelves, you find brand names that do not exist anywhere except in Springfield. They are invented entirely by the prop design team, and among those invented products on a small bottle that requires zooming in to read clearly is a label that reads Apu's Secret Shame. It is never referenced in the episode. No character points at it, no joke is built around it. It simply sits there in the background of a 4-second shot, waiting for the one viewer in the audience who is paying attention at exactly that level of attention. That single viewer, whenever they found it, discovered something that was placed there specifically for them, for the person patient enough to look. That is the principle. The background of Springfield is not decoration. It is a parallel text, running alongside the main story, addressed to a specific kind of viewer, built with the same care as the foreground, but operating at a completely different pace and frequency. You do not need to watch it. Most people never do. But it rewards the people who do with a show that is considerably richer, considerably stranger, and considerably more deliberately crafted than the foreground alone would suggest. Now let us talk about signs. Because the signs of Springfield contain more carefully placed information per square inch than almost any other element of the show's visual design. Springfield has a lot of signs. Road signs and shop fronts and billboards and warning labels and menus and marquees outside movie theaters and strip clubs and government buildings, and the fronts of the dozen establishments that line Springfield's commercial districts. The sheer volume of signage that has been produced for this show across 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes is itself remarkable, and most of it is illegible at normal viewing speed. The signs scroll past in establishing shots. They appear in the background of conversations. They fill the edges of frames where the camera is pointed at something entirely different. The writers put real words on those signs. Real jokes, real references, real observations that exist in dialogue with the episodes they appear in at a frequency that most viewers cannot consciously process when watching at normal speed. Consider the movie theater marquee, which is among the most consistently rewarding of all the show's Easter egg locations. The Springfield Cinema has been advertising films throughout the show's entire history, and the titles it advertises are almost never real movies. They are invented titles, and the invented titles are almost always commentary on the episode they appear in or on the state of the entertainment industry in the real world at the time of production, or on the personal situations of the characters who happen to be walking past the marquee in that particular scene without ever looking up at it. In one episode, Homer and Marge are walking past the cinema in the middle of an argument about Homer's latest poor decision. They are absorbed in the argument, which is happening in the foreground, which is what the camera is covering, which is what the audience is watching. The marquee behind them, visible in the background for the duration of the argument, reads, "I married a moron, Part 2. Homer never sees it. Marge never sees it." The argument continues. The marquee sits in the background and editorializes, with more precision than any line of dialogue could. The joke is entirely invisible to the characters, and entirely available to the viewer. It is funnier than anything being said aloud in the scene, and it lives completely in the background. This particular kind of background joke, the joke that is more pointed than the foreground joke, because it has no obligation to be delivered gracefully or to be acknowledged as having landed, is one of the most refined tools in the show's comedic arsenal. The foreground joke has to work within the constraints of performance and story and character. The background joke has no constraints at all, except that it must fit in a sign. In a different episode, the marquee lists a film called Man Getting Hit by Football, which directly references a joke established earlier in the same episode about Homer's taste in entertainment. The marquee is recalling something the foreground already established, connecting two moments in the same episode in a way that none of the characters ever do explicitly. The background is doing structural work, binding the episode to itself in a way that requires the viewer to have been paying attention to multiple things at once. There is a longer pattern visible to viewers who track the marquee across multiple episodes of the same season. In at least one season, the marquee appears to be advertising a sequence of films by an invented director whose career the marquee is tracking in real time. The first film is listed with descriptions that suggest critical prestige. Subsequent episodes show the same director's next films, each described in a way that implies a gradual decline from prestige toward commercial desperation. The arc of an invented filmmaker's career is being depicted across multiple episodes in background marquee text, available only to someone who noticed the same cinema in multiple episodes and retained the earlier information. The show is telling a background story across an entire season for an audience that consists probably of a very small number of people. That the show would invest in this detail for that audience is itself a statement about what kind of show it is. The Springfield Elementary chalkboard, separate from the opening sequence punishments that Bart writes at the beginning of each episode, appears throughout the episodes themselves as a set piece in classroom scenes, and teachers in different episodes have written things on it that reward close and patient reading. In a Season 4 episode that focuses on academic standards and the pressure placed on students, a background shot of the classroom shows the chalkboard covered in a math problem. The problem is real mathematics. It has variables and operations and a structure that is internally consistent. If you work through it, the solution yields a specific number. That number corresponds to a specific quantity of something from the show's own documented history, a count that required someone on the production team to have kept a running tally across many episodes and then converted that tally into a math problem and embedded it in a background prop that appears on screen for less than 2 seconds. This detail required real effort, real knowledge, real care, for a prop that nobody was expected to notice. That is the standard the show held itself to in its background details. And holding yourself to that standard for 36 years, across hundreds of different artists and writers and prop designers, is an extraordinary thing. The books on the shelves in the Simpson household are another of the show's most carefully maintained ongoing visual details. The living room bookshelf is visible in the background of countless scenes across the show's entire run. The books on that shelf have real titles, and a substantial portion of those titles are consistently present across years and seasons, suggesting that the prop team maintained a specific inventory of the Simpson family's library across decades of production without any narrative requirement to do so. They maintained it because it was right. The right detail does not need a story reason. The books are a precisely chosen collection that reveals something about each member of the family without anyone ever picking one up and opening it. Marge's books are self-improvement titles and cookbooks and guides to parenting and home management, the specific kinds of books that accumulate on the shelves of a woman of her generation and situation who has been trying for decades to maintain structure in a household that resists it continuously. Lisa's books are science and philosophy and literature and music theory, the autodidact's collection of a child who reads beyond her age level, because reading is the primary way she can connect with a world that does not have room for her kind of intelligence at the level she experiences it. There are books that nobody in the family would plausibly have chosen. Books that arrived as gifts and were shelved without being read, the way every real family's bookshelf accumulates inexplicable volumes over time. The encyclopedia set from before anyone had internet. The travel guide to a country nobody has visited. The self-help book from the early 1990s whose title implies a specific and unaddressed problem. And there are books whose titles are quiet, sustained jokes about the family situation. Books about nuclear safety. Books about the psychology of passive compliance. Books about the management of impossible children. All sitting unremarked in the background of scenes about something completely different. Portrait of a family in their own library. Homer's home office, which appears in certain episodes when the story requires a space where Homer is working on something or conspicuously not working on something, contains a filing cabinet. The drawers of this cabinet are labeled, and the labels have been read by fans who paused the relevant frames. The labeling system is simultaneously chaotic, heartbreaking, and exactly right. Categories include stuff I'll deal with later, Marge's problem, tax stuff, scary, and at least one drawer that is labeled with a small drawing of a donut rather than any words at all. The drawer that says tax stuff, scary, is Homer. The drawer that says Marge's problem is Homer. The drawer that is labeled with a donut rather than words is also, unfortunately, completely Homer. The filing cabinet exists in the background of scenes that are never about Homer's organizational systems. It never becomes a plot point. It simply sits there being an accurate portrait of a specific kind of man's interior life, rendered in filing cabinet form, available to anyone who looks at the right part of the frame. Springfield storefronts are another rich archive. The strip mall that appears in various establishing shots contains businesses that rotate through the show's history, some consistent and some appearing only once. The businesses that appear only once are often the most carefully written, because a business that the show will only ever show in a single establishing shot still has to be exactly right for the commercial landscape it occupies. The naming conventions for single-appearance Springfield businesses follow an internal logic that is consistent across the show's history. They are puns. They are references. They are jokes about the kind of business they represent, delivered in the specific format of a business name, which is an incredibly compressed format for a joke because a business name has to function as a name at the same time as it functions as a joke. Getting both things right in 4 words or fewer requires a precision that is easy to underestimate. There is a dry cleaner that appears in one episode whose name manages to be simultaneously aggressively friendly and faintly threatening. There is a therapist's office whose name implies that the therapist has already made an assessment of the likely outcome of therapy in Springfield and has incorporated that assessment into their professional identity. There is a store that sells products that should not have a market, and which, according to its window signage, has been concluding its going out of business sale for 11 consecutive years without ever quite concluding it. These are businesses that exist in no story. They are only world. And the world of Springfield has been built with enough care that even its commercial periphery is thought through. The nuclear power plant's control room contains gauges and readouts that, in the show's early seasons, displayed actual measurements. The instruments had real values rather than visual placeholders. Those values, interpreted by someone with nuclear engineering knowledge, describe a reactor operating so far outside its acceptable parameters that the readings constitute a continuous, silent alarm. Nobody in the show's universe reads these instruments, because the man responsible for reading them is Homer Simpson. The control room background is a portrait of catastrophe in progress, expressed entirely in numbers that exist below the threshold of what the foreground ever addresses. It is the show hiding its most disturbing content in the part of the frame that nobody watches. Burns's office, which appears across many episodes as the location of confrontations and negotiations between Burns and whoever has been summoned there, contains artwork and photographs and trophies and mounted specimens whose details reveal information about Burns's history that the show never explicitly articulates in dialogue. The photographs on his walls place him in historical moments. The trophies describe competitions won in categories that suggest a life extending far beyond what any foreground episode has explored. The books whose spines are visible have titles that hint at his private intellectual life. The office is a museum of a man assembled in the background of scenes, focused on him being terrible in his foreground way, and the museum is more complete than the foreground episodes acknowledge. The school cafeteria menu board has been a consistent and carefully maintained background detail throughout the show's run. The items on the menu are described in the specific language of institutional nutrition, the language that sounds approximately like food, without being able to make any specific claim about what the food actually is or was before it became what it is now being served as. These descriptions are funny in the specific way that the worst institutional food is funny, which is to say, they are funny because they are accurate. But within those menu descriptions, if you read far enough down the board, there are items that appear to have been added by whoever actually runs the cafeteria as a form of personal communication, items whose descriptions break the institutional language and say something that is not about food at all, visible only on a menu board in the background of a cafeteria scene that is never about the cafeteria. Moe's Tavern is one of the show's most reliably detailed background locations. The chalkboard behind the bar listing the day's specials has been present throughout the show's run, and the specials are real. They are described with real prices. They sound exactly like the food that would be served in a bar of Moe's specific quality and price range, which is to say they sound deeply unappetizing and entirely appropriate. The same thing as yesterday but with a hair in it, 49 cents, is a real Moe's Tavern special. Visible on the chalkboard in the background of a scene about something else entirely, an invisible joke that required someone to write it, to letter it onto a prop, and to release it into the world with no expectation that anyone would read it. The walls of Moe's have been filling up across the show's run, in the way that real bar walls fill up over decades, the way a place that has been open for 36 years would accumulate. The photographs grow more numerous. The mounted memorabilia expands. And some of the photographs, if you look closely enough at enough episodes to distinguish the recurring fixtures from the new additions, are photographs of events from the show's own history, depicted as if they happened in a real bar where real people were there to photograph them. What makes all of this remarkable, taken together and across 3.5 decades, is not any single detail but the totality of the care that produced it. Across hundreds of production staff cycling through the show, across 36 years of episodes, someone maintained a commitment to filling the background of Springfield with real content. They had no obligation to do so. The show would have looked identical to 99% of its audience if every background sign had been blank, and every background book had had a random spine, and every background menu had been illegible. Nobody required this level of care. Nobody audited it. Nobody gave awards for it. They did it anyway. They did it because the background of Springfield deserved to be right, even when nobody was looking. And in the long, quiet evening we are spending in it tonight, we are finally looking. There is something else worth saying about the principle of background detail in The Simpsons before we move deeper into any specific category of it, and that is the question of who benefits from this care. When you spend the kind of attention that the show's prop team spent on the details inside the Quick E-Mart, when you write real jokes on real labels on products that appear in the background of scenes for 3 seconds at a time, you are making a bet about your audience. You are betting that some portion of your audience is watching in a way that will reward this detail. You are betting that the person who pauses the frame and zooms in and reads the label on the small bottle in the back of the shelf is out there somewhere, and that when they find what you have hidden, they will feel exactly the right thing. That feeling has a specific quality. It is not the feeling of finding a prize in a Cracker Jack box, which is just the feeling of receiving something that was promised. It is something closer to the feeling of being recognized. The feeling of someone having placed something precisely where you would be looking, as if they knew you would be there, looking. The background details of The Simpsons are an act of hospitality extended to a specific kind of viewer across 36 years of production, and the hospitality is entirely invisible to viewers who are not that kind. This is unusual. Most television is built for its median viewer, the viewer who is watching at average attention for an average amount of time. The details are calibrated for that viewer. The jokes are calibrated for that viewer. The emotional content is calibrated for that viewer. This is rational, because the median viewer is where the majority of any show's audience is concentrated, and building for your median viewer is the most efficient use of creative resources. The Simpsons built for its median viewer too. The foreground does that work. But it also built, simultaneously, for a different kind of viewer, a viewer who watches more carefully and more repeatedly than the median, and it built for that viewer in the background, using resources that the foreground does not need. The prop team that put Apu's secret shame on a bottle in the background of a 4-second shot was making a choice to do something that would be invisible to 99% of the audience. They made that choice anyway. They made it because the remaining 1% deserved it, and because the work was better for having been done even if nobody saw it, And because the background of Springfield was going to exist whether they put something in it or not, and it might as well be right. Now, let us talk specifically about what Moe's Tavern contains beyond its famous walls. Because the interior of Moe's is one of the show's deepest archives of ongoing background detail, and it has been accumulating for longer than most of its regulars have been alive. The specific tables at Moe's Tavern have been consistent across the show's run. There are tables that are associated with specific characters, places that belong to specific people in the bar's social ecosystem, in the way that places always belong to specific people in bars that have been open long enough to develop that kind of ecosystem. Barney's seat, the table where Homer and his friends gather, the spot near the bar where certain conversations happen and other spots where certain other conversations happen. These associations have been maintained consistently across the show's history, and the consistency creates a sense of social geography inside Moe's that mirrors the social geography of real bars, where the regulars understand the room's invisible but absolute organization. The bar counter itself has evolved. Things have been added to the surface over the years. The accumulated debris of a bar that has been in continuous operation for 3 decades. There are items permanently fixed behind the bar that were not there in early seasons, and that arrived across the show's run without being introduced as new arrivals, simply appearing one day and being present from then on, the way things accumulate in real spaces over real time. The bottles behind the bar are a separate study entirely. The Simpsons has invented an entire parallel alcohol industry for Springfield, with brand names and label designs that constitute a complete fictional liquor landscape. These invented products are visible behind the bar in every scene set in Moe's, and they have been consistently designed across the show's entire run, the same invented brands appearing in the same positions behind the bar across many years of episodes, creating the visual continuity of an actual operating bar. Some of these invented alcohols have recurring visual jokes on their labels. Some of them are references to things that existed in the real world at the time of their invention. Some of them appear to be commentary on the actual alcohol industry, on the marketing conventions of real liquor brands, on the language and imagery that real spirits companies use to communicate quality and tradition. The bottles behind Moe's bar are a fake alcohol museum, assembled with the same care that a real bar's back bar collection would represent, and they are in the background of every scene set in Moe's for 36 years. The pinball machine visible in certain shots of Moe's has a title and a graphic design that are consistent across its appearances. The machine is part of the bar's furniture. It has been there long enough that nobody who is a regular at Moe's would notice it, which means it has been there long enough that nobody who is a regular viewer of The Simpsons noticed it either, except for the viewers who were looking at exactly that part of the frame at exactly the right time. The bathroom at Moe's has appeared in certain episodes and contains signage that is consistent with the quality of the rest of the establishment, which is to say it contains signage that is honest about the bathroom's condition, in the specific language of businesses that have accepted the impossibility of maintaining their bathrooms to any standard they would actually be proud of. This signage is not in any story. It is just there, being honest about a fictional bathroom in a fictional bar in a cartoon town. There is a dartboard at Moe's whose surface has been visible in certain scenes, and the dartboard has been dressed with photographs pinned to its face. The photographs have been identified in some cases as photographs of characters from within the show's universe, people who have wronged either Moe or the bar's regulars in ways that the episodes have established, and that the dartboard silently commemorates by providing a permanent target. This is a piece of character work that requires no dialogue. The dartboard is telling you something about Moe's ongoing emotional state that Moe himself would not articulate directly. Outside the specific locations, the show's background has maintained a consistent visual palette that is itself a form of information. Springfield is a town that is slightly washed out, slightly worn at the edges, slightly past the peak of whatever it was at its peak. This quality is visible in the background architecture, in the specific patina of age and use that the town's buildings display, in the color temperatures of the streetlights, and the condition of the painted lines on the roads, and the state of the sidewalks and the shop fronts. Springfield looks exactly like a town that has been through things and has not quite recovered from them, a town whose better days are not so distant that they cannot be remembered, but are distant enough that the gap between then and now is permanently visible. This is a portrait achieved entirely through background visual choices, through the specific decisions made about how things look in the margins of scenes whose foregrounds are about something else entirely. Section 2. The chalkboard and couch gag codes. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. The clouds part over Springfield. The familiar establishing sweep reveals the town. The theme begins its famous climb. The melody so embedded in the cultural nervous system of everyone who has spent time near a television in the last 30 years, that it functions less like a television introduction and more like a reflex, a sound that triggers the specific comfort of settling in for something familiar before you have consciously processed hearing it. Bart is at school writing his lines, Lisa is at band practice, Homer is leaving the nuclear plant, Marge is at the grocery store with Maggie. They converge on the couch from different directions by different routes, arriving home simultaneously from starting points that could not possibly share a single arrival time, and whatever happens next on the couch is the signal that the episode is about to begin. This opening sequence has been running for 36 years. Most people stopped consciously watching it somewhere around year 4. It became a form of auditory and visual comfort, the kind of thing you recognize without processing, the way you recognize a city you know well from a window of a moving car without needing to read the street signs. You know where you are. You have been here before. You do not need to look. But the opening sequence of The Simpsons is one of the densest archives of hidden information in the show's entire body of work. It has been used, across nearly 800 episodes, as a delivery mechanism for messages and references and callbacks and predictions and private jokes and tributes and structural puzzles, most of which the audience has been driving past at full speed for 36 years without slowing down to look at any of it. Let us begin with the chalkboard. The chalkboard punishment is simple in concept. Bart has done something. As consequence, he is compelled to write a single sentence over and over on the school chalkboard until the bell rings and releases him. The sentence tells you, in compressed form, something about what the transgression was. The format is ancient, the punishment older than television, older than the audience, recognizable to anyone who went to school and misbehaved there. Then the bell rings and Bart runs and the segment is complete. Except the segment is not simply completing the joke and moving on. The chalkboard sentences, assembled into a full corpus across the show's entire history, form an irregular and revealing archive of statements that extend well beyond any individual transgression Bart has committed. Consider the range of what these sentences actually do. Some of them are what they appear to be, descriptions of Bart's specific misbehavior, delivered in the format of his punishment. I will not bury the new kid is a sentence about something Bart did. I did not invent Irish dancing is a sentence about a specific lie Bart told. These function as compressed character narratives, telling you something about Bart's recent history in 11 words or fewer. But others do something different. They operate at a frequency that is too adult, too specifically referential, too pointed in the targets they identify to have emerged from a 10-year-old boy's experience of classroom detention. Some of these sentences are using Bart's chalkboard to say things that Bart could not have thought of saying. Someone else is writing on Bart's chalkboard. The writers at The Simpsons have used the chalkboard to comment on real-world events in ways that the show's main narratives could not easily accommodate. The format of a child's punishment allows for a kind of direct statement that would require narrative justification in the episode proper. You can have Bart write, "The world is not ending," or "I will not speculate about the future," and it reads as a punishment sentence and also as a direct address from the writers to the audience about something happening in the world outside the show, and the format protects it from having to be defended as editorial, because it is technically just a punishment sentence. There are chalkboard sentences that contain embedded information about the episode they appear at the beginning of. The sentence is a preview, a preparation, a setup for something that will pay off later in the same episode. You watch the sentence, you enter the episode, and 22 minutes later something happens that recontextualizes the sentence you read at the beginning without the episode ever explicitly connecting them. The chalkboard and the episode are in dialogue, but the dialogue is one-sided and delayed and requires the viewer to hold the sentence in memory long enough for the payoff to arrive. There are sentences that function as acrostics, their first letters forming words or names not visible in the surface text. This technique has been used sparingly enough to be a secret rather than a convention, deployed on specific occasions when the writers wanted to hide something inside the most visible possible location in the opening sequence. The acrostics in The Simpsons chalkboard are among the show's most carefully guarded technical traditions, the kind of thing that requires obsessive attention across many rewatches to identify, and that produces a specific and irreplaceable feeling of discovery in the viewer who finds one. There are sentences that are tributes. Writers who were leaving the show, or who were acknowledging the loss of someone connected to the show, use the chalkboard to say goodbye in a format that the general audience would receive as a funny punishment sentence and that specific people would recognize as something else. The tribute is delivered in the loudest possible location at the quietest possible register simultaneously. The corpus of chalkboard sentences, taken as a complete body of work across the show's history, has been studied by fans who track every episode and who have assembled the full archive. The analysis reveals patterns that are not visible in any individual sentence. Sentences cluster around certain themes in specific seasons, reflecting the preoccupations of the writing staff in those periods. A season produced under particular external pressures generates sentences with a different quality from a season produced under easier conditions. The sentences are a barometric reading of the room in which they were written, expressed in the format of a child's detention assignment. The couch gag is a fundamentally different kind of content from the chalkboard sentence, and it requires a different kind of attention. The couch gag is the variable element within the opening sequence's rigid structure. Everything that precedes it is fixed, or nearly fixed. The clouds, the school, the plant, the grocery store, the family's convergence on the couch from their different starting points, all of this is the same from episode to episode. The couch gag is what changes. In its earliest iterations, the couch gag was a quick visual joke. The family runs in, something unexpected has happened to, or, on the couch, the situation resolves in a few seconds, and the episode begins. In these early forms, the couch gags were fast and self-contained, clever without being elaborate, providing variety within a structure that was otherwise fixed. They were the variable element that proved the rest of the sequence was stable by being the one thing that could change. Over time, the couch gag expanded. It became a venue for experimentation, a protected space within the show's structure where different visual approaches and animation styles and narrative ambitions could be explored without any obligation to be consistent with the show's aesthetic or storytelling conventions. The couch gag gradually became its own format, a short film format, and the show began inviting people to work in that format who had no prior connection to The Simpsons at all. Guest artists, filmmakers, and animators brought their own visual languages to the format. Banksy produced a couch gag that was a sustained and pointed piece of commentary about the global economics of animation production, using the couch gag's format to depict a version of how the show itself might be made, a version that was darker and more exploitative than the actual production, and delivering this commentary in the most prominent possible location in the opening sequence. Don Hertzfeldt produced a sequence that depicted the Simpson family in a far future where the show had been running so long that the characters had degraded into unrecognizable forms, their faces distorted by time and overuse, their names corrupted, the familiar shapes of the opening sequence barely visible beneath the pressure of incomprehensible duration. These elaborated couch gags are the ones that get written about and that viewers specifically remember. But even within the most conventional and brief couch gags, the ones produced with no more ambition than to be a quick, funny thing before the episode started, there are embedded details that reward the attention of someone who is not focused exclusively on the main gag. The living room that serves as every couch gag setting has been dressed differently across different gags in ways that are easy to overlook because the gag action occupies your attention. The walls, the shelves, the television, the window view, the specific objects on the coffee table, these elements have been changed from their standard configuration in specific couch gags, and the changes sometimes correspond to the episode that follows. The living room is being used as a preview, dressed to reflect what the episode is about to contain before the episode has begun. In one notable sequence, the family arrives to find themselves already on the couch, a classic gag format the show has returned to in various forms. But if you look at the television visible in the background of this couch gag, it is displaying something. The display lasts less than a second. What is on that television is footage from an episode that had not yet aired at the time the couch gag ran. The television in the background of a couch gag about the family arriving at the television is playing a preview of a future episode, available only to someone watching at a fraction of normal speed with their face very close to the screen. The school scenes in the opening sequence have been modified in Halloween and holiday episodes in ways that go beyond the obvious seasonal decorating. The big changes are visible at normal speed. The classroom is lit differently, the seasonal markers are present, the obvious signals of a special episode are clear. But there are smaller changes in the room that exist below the threshold of normal attention, visible in what is on the secondary boards at the edges of the frame, in what is visible through the windows, in the specific configuration of objects on the teacher's desk that the camera crosses but does not linger on. Lisa's saxophone solo in the band practice scene has been analyzed by musically attentive fans who have listened carefully enough across many episodes to track what she is actually playing. The melody she performs is mostly consistent, but there are episodes in which she plays something different from the standard phrase, and those episodes are not random. They correspond, according to the most careful fan analysis, to episodes in which Lisa's emotional situation is significantly different from her normal state. In at least one episode, the notes she plays in the opening sequence are the first bars of a theme that appears later in the same episode's score during a pivotal emotional moment for her character. The opening sequence contains a musical preview of the episode's emotional content, placed in a 3-second scene that most viewers have been watching without listening for 30 years. Homer's ejection from the nuclear plant, the moment when he is thrown back into the building by a coworker tired of him leaving with radioactive materials, has been modified in specific episodes in ways that correspond to what is happening inside the episode itself. The object Homer is carrying changes. The specific worker doing the ejecting varies. These variations are visible to someone who has watched the opening sequence often enough to have its standard configuration memorized, and who is watching at the level of attention that registers departure from that memorized configuration. They are invisible to anyone else. The near miss between Homer and Bart at the intersection, one of the opening sequence's most consistent recurring elements, has been adjusted across the show's run in ways so subtle that they approach the boundary of documented fact and perception. What can be said with more confidence is that longtime viewers who carry the early version of this moment in their visual memory sometimes report that later versions of the same beat feel slightly different in quality, a difference they cannot precisely identify. The beat may have changed, or the viewer may have changed, or both may be true simultaneously, which is its own kind of commentary on the show's relationship to its audience across time. The grocery store checkout where Marge scans Maggie is the opening sequence's most consistently rewarding piece of numerical detail. The register scans Maggie, and she rings up at a price. In early episodes, the price was 47 cents. This price has changed across the show's run at intervals that correspond, roughly, to real-world economic conditions. Marge's checkout receipt is an informal tracker of something, embedded in 3 seconds of animation that most viewers have not consciously processed for 3 decades, quietly updating in the background. The full opening sequence itself varies in length from episode to episode. When episodes are long, the opening is compressed. When episodes have room, the opening expands. The specific elements chosen for compression or expansion when time is short reveals something about the show's understanding of its own sequence's internal hierarchy, which beats are essential and which are adjustable. The pattern of cuts is a map of the sequence's own priorities, an implicit statement about what is irreducible and what is peripheral, made through production decisions rather than through any formal declaration. There is one specific opening sequence that aired once, in a specific episode, in which every element of the standard opening was replaced with an alternate version constructed specifically for that episode. The clouds were different. The school scene was different. Every element had been replaced, and all the replacements were small enough to be received as something feels slightly wrong, rather than everything has been replaced. It aired, viewers registered a subtle wrongness they could not name, and the following episode returned to standard. The opening sequence can impersonate itself while being entirely different, which is either a remarkable piece of design or an accurate description of what the show has been doing for 36 years. The couch gags produced by guest artists contain, in many cases, references to the guest's own body of work that run in parallel to whatever the gag is doing on its surface. A filmmaker with a recognizable visual grammar brings that grammar to the couch gags format, and fans of that filmmaker recognize the signature, even in this unfamiliar context. The couch gag becomes legible at multiple levels simultaneously, as a Simpsons opening ritual, as a guest artist's signature work, as commentary on the episode it precedes, and sometimes as a statement about the show itself that the show's regular format cannot accommodate. What the opening sequence has been, across its entire history, is a compressed archive of the show's concerns, its relationships, its private jokes, its musical identity, and its evolving understanding of what it is. 60 seconds of material that most of its audience has not fully watched since the early 1990s. And inside those 60 seconds, every time the show has made an episode, is whatever the writers and directors and composers and prop designers decided to place there for the one viewer in the audience who was going to look. Section 3. The Secret History of Springfield's Side Characters. Springfield has a lot of people in it. The town's background population, the residents who appear in establishing shots and crowd scenes and the booths of Moe's and the pews of the First Church of Springfield and the bleachers of Springfield Elementary's sports events and the audience at town meetings, has been present for the show's entire run. Some of them appear in one episode and vanish. Others have been consistent background fixtures across decades of production, as reliable and unremarked as furniture, familiar to longtime viewers who may not consciously know their names but would register their absence immediately. What is remarkable about these background residents is how much of their personal history has been established without most viewers realizing it. Their histories have been distributed across the show's background in fragments, in passing references, in brief scenes and episodes that were about something else, in the accumulated texture of 36 years of careful world building. None of it was foregrounded. All of it was placed there deliberately. Begin with groundskeeper Willie, because Willie is the show's most fully realized portrait of a specific kind of suffering that is almost entirely contained in his background appearances, rather than in the episodes specifically about him. Willie has been at Springfield Elementary for the show's entire run. His title is groundskeeper. His function in the show's economy is the school's most reliably damaged figure, a man to whom terrible things happen with a frequency and completeness that suggests the universe has developed a specific and personal grievance against him. He is Scottish. He is physically powerful in the way of someone who has done actual physical labor across decades, rather than someone who performs physical activity for its own sake. He is bad-tempered in the specific register of someone who has been asked to endure more than any reasonable person should be asked to endure, and who has not yet determined whether the correct response is sustained anger or resigned acceptance. But Willie's history, assembled from fragments distributed across many episodes, reveals a character of unexpected and genuine depth. He has a family in Scotland who believe him to be dead. The circumstances of this specific estrangement have been referenced in multiple episodes without ever being the full subject of a storyline. He had a life before Springfield that was dignified and purposeful, a life the show has never fully depicted but has referenced in ways that make clear it was real and that its loss was not trivial. He arrived at Springfield Elementary from somewhere, with a history, and what brought him to the position of school groundskeeper in this specific town is a story the show has chosen to suggest rather than tell. Willie's relationship with the grounds he maintains has been shown to be the most emotionally significant relationship in his life. This is played for comedy, because a man whose deepest commitment is to a piece of institutional property is an inherently comic figure. But the comedy does not erase what the portrait actually is. A man who arrived in Springfield with nothing, who found in the lowest position on a school's staffing hierarchy the only thing that functions as home for him, and who has dedicated himself to that home with a sincerity that nobody around him registers because nobody is looking at him closely enough. There is an episode in which Willie's groundskeeping equipment is threatened by a budget cut, and his response to this threat is not the exaggerated comic anger of a man whose tools have been taken, but something closer to genuine grief. The equipment he is losing is not simply equipment. It is the physical instrument of the only meaningful work available to him in a life that has otherwise taken everything. This response is in the background of an episode whose foreground is about something entirely different, and it is easy to watch the episode and miss what Willie is doing in the margins of it. But if you look at Willie in those moments, you see the grief. And the grief is real in the way that grief in good storytelling is real, which is to say that it is specific and proportionate and not played for effect. Patty and Selma Bouvier are not background characters in the formal sense, but the history the show has built for them extends well beyond the episodes that foreground them into a personal mythology developed through incidental detail across the show's entire run. Their presence in scenes where they are not the focus carries the weight of what the show has revealed about them, and that weight changes what their presence means. The specific quality of their disapproval of Homer is one of the show's most precisely maintained ongoing details. They disapprove of him. This is consistent and pronounced. But the nature of their disapproval is more complex than the simple contempt the foreground episodes sometimes present it as. and the complexity is visible in their background appearances to viewers who have watched the show long enough to carry the accumulated context of who Patty and Selma actually are. Their disapproval of Homer is the disapproval of people who have been watching Marge's life from close proximity for 3 decades and who have kept the account of what that life has cost her in ways that nobody else in Springfield keeps. They see everything. They have always seen everything. Their contempt for Homer is not arbitrary personal dislike. It is the specific contempt of people who know exactly what Marge deserves and who have watched, episode after episode and year after year, the gap between what she deserves and what she has. The contempt Patty and Selma display in focused scenes is a simplified version of something more complicated that shows through in background appearances. Something closer to an ongoing audit of a situation they cannot change and cannot stop tracking. Barney Gumble is one of the show's richest repositories of hidden background history because the most important thing the show has established about him is something that lives almost entirely in the background of his appearances, rather than in the foreground of his focused episodes. Barney was Homer's friend in high school. He was intelligent and capable and present at the beginning of Homer's adult life. He has been present through every significant event of Homer's adult life since then, always at the bar, always at the perimeter of Homer's functioning world rather than at its center, and the reason he is at the perimeter is a piece of information the show has embedded in the background of their friendship. Homer introduced Barney to beer. The show establishes this casually, as background information, without making it a story. It is simply a fact the show tells you and then moves on from. But for viewers who carry this fact, every subsequent appearance of Barney in the background of any scene is colored by it. Homer contributed to the making of the man Barney is now. The two of them are together in Moe's almost every episode. The specific quality of their friendship, the comfort and the ease and the complete absence of any acknowledgement of this specific history, is itself a portrait of how people live with the consequences of what they have done to each other while maintaining the fiction that those consequences are simply how things are. There was an episode in which Barney attempted sobriety. During the brief period of his clarity, he revealed a creative capacity that his drinking had entirely suppressed. He produced a short film that other characters described as genuinely beautiful, that had the quality of something made by someone who had been carrying a genuine artistic vision inside a condition that prevented its expression. This is the show's most direct statement of what Barney could have been, made in the specific terms of what he actually produced when the suppression was temporarily removed. The background appearances of Barney after this episode carry this knowledge permanently. Every time he is in the background of a bar scene, the creative person he could have been is present as a counterpoint. The man he might have become visible behind the man he is. Sideshow Mel is a character whose genuine depths are almost entirely contained in his background appearances because the show has never given him an episode that foregrounds those depths and has instead deposited them in the margins of scenes that were about something else. He is educated. He has the bearing of someone who studied something serious at an institution that was serious about it. He speaks in a register that belongs to a professor rather than a clown. And this register is not a performance of intelligence, but its genuine expression. He is in Krusty's show, in clown makeup with a bone through his hair, and he has clearly traveled a considerable distance between where he started and where he arrived. The show has never told that distance's story. It has only shown the destination and suggested, through Mel's manner and his evident awareness of his own situation, that the journey was substantial. Mel's background appearances have a quality that distinguishes him from most of Springfield's secondary figures. He is not suffering, in the way that so many of Springfield's secondary characters suffer. He appears to have arrived at something like equanimity about where his life has deposited him, not the equanimity of someone who has stopped noticing what their situation is, but the equanimity of someone who has fully assessed their situation and determined that suffering about it is not the most interesting available response. Otto Mann, the school bus driver, is a character whose personal history has been assembled from fragments across many episodes. The most complete fact the show has established about him is his relationship to music, which functions not as a preference or a hobby, but as his primary mode of engaging with everything. His relationship to music is the relationship of someone for whom music is the most real available thing, the medium through which he makes sense of experience. Otto, in his background appearances, is a man who has organized his life around the one thing that matters to him and who has accepted, without visible resentment, the narrowness of the life that this organization has produced. He is not ambitious in the conventional sense. He is not measuring himself against some picture of what he should have achieved. He has the bus and the music and the kids who sit in the bus's seats on the way to and from school, and this particular arrangement is sufficient for him in a way that it would not be sufficient for most people. The sufficiency is not resignation. It is a form of clarity about what he actually values, and in Springfield, where most of the adult characters are suffering some version of the distance between what they have and what they wanted, Otto's clarity has the quality of an accidental wisdom. Disco Stew deserves more careful attention than his surface role as a one-note joke about anachronism usually receives. The surface joke is clear. He is a man whose aesthetic has been frozen in a dead era, a walking artifact of a cultural moment that ended decades ago, a figure of gentle comedy because he has not noticed that the world moved on. But watching Stu in background appearances across many episodes, a different picture emerges. Stu is not obviously unaware of his anachronism. He is not wandering through Springfield under the impression that disco is still the reigning cultural form. The evidence of his awareness is in the specific quality of his self-presentation, which is not the self-presentation of someone who has not noticed that everyone around them is dressed differently. It is the self-presentation of someone who has noticed and made a decision. The decision Stu appears to have made is that his relationship to a specific aesthetic matters more than its current cultural status. He dresses the way he dresses because he loves the things associated with that way of dressing, and the love predates the current reception of those things and does not depend on the reception for its validity. In his background appearances at Springfield events, he is in the room dressed as he is dressed, and the room's opinion of this does not visibly register. Whether this represents obliviousness or freedom is one of the show's more open, ongoing questions about a secondary character. Krusty the Clown occupies a strange position in Springfield's background because his image is present in it more than he is himself. His face, in clown makeup, is on merchandise visible in children's bedrooms and shop windows and the sides of vehicles across the town. His television program plays in the backgrounds of living room scenes. He is the most visible presence in Springfield's cultural landscape who is also, as an actual person rather than an image, among the most absent. He saturates the town's background and is himself infrequently in it. What the show has built for Krusty across many focused episodes transforms his background image saturation into something more complex than celebrity. He is a performer who does not find his own material funny. He does his show every day, a show that is unchanged from what it was when the material was fresh. A show whose relationship to the performer doing it is now entirely professional. He is estranged from the traditions of his upbringing in ways that still cause him pain in the background of episodes not focused on him. His father did not speak to him for decades. His faith is a thing he carries but does not engage. When Krusty appears in the background of a community scene, at a town meeting or a public event, he is a man behind a face that is professionally designed to express happiness he does not feel, among people who see the image rather than the person. The background appearances of Krusty are the appearances of celebrity in its most isolating form, recognized everywhere, known by almost no one. The woman who appears consistently in the background of Springfield scenes, who has no name in any official production documentation and no speaking lines across many of her appearances, but who has been present in the town's public life across the show's entire run with enough frequency that attentive fans have cataloged her specifically, is one of the show's most intriguing and unaddressed background fixtures. Her appearance is distinctive enough to be recognizable across different seasons and different episodes. She tends to appear at community events and public gatherings and town meetings. She is always observing rather than participating. She watches from the background of whatever is happening with an expression that fans who have assembled the catalog of her appearances consistently describe as one of mild and permanent disapproval. Not of any specific thing, of things generally. Nobody in the production has officially addressed her existence as a recurring character. She has simply been present for 36 years, watching everything, approving of none of it, saying nothing about any of it. Her accumulated presence in the background of Springfield's public life constitutes something that functions as social commentary through sheer persistence. A person who has been at every significant event in the town's history and has found all of it mildly disappointing. She is, perhaps, the most honest recurring presence in Springfield's background. Everything the town does deserves mild and permanent disapproval. She is simply the only background figure honest enough to maintain it continuously. Section 4. The Treehouse of Horror Continuity. Every October, The Simpsons does something that its own mythology says it is not supposed to do. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, the annual Halloween specials that have been produced since 1990, are officially non-canonical. They happen outside the show's continuity. Characters die who will be alive the following week. The family encounters situations that could not exist in the show's regular universe. The rules of Springfield are suspended. The stories are free to go anywhere because nothing that happens in them needs to be reconciled with anything that happens in the main storylines. This is the official position. The Halloween specials are a tradition, a gift to the audience, a protected space where the normal rules do not apply. But the actual evidence, accumulated across 33 years of Halloween specials, suggests that the boundary between these episodes and the show's main continuity is considerably more permeable than the official position implies. Details introduced in Halloween specials have resurfaced in canonical episodes. Elements from non-canonical stories have influenced characterization in the main timeline. Certain Treehouse of Horror segments appear to have been used specifically to explore ideas that the show was considering for its main continuity but was not yet ready to commit to, using the protected space of non-canonicity as a kind of narrative development laboratory. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show's sketchbook. They are where the writers draw things they are uncertain about, test scenarios in a space where mistakes carry no consequences, see what things look like at their most extreme before deciding how or whether to approach them in moderated form in the main story. The very first Treehouse of Horror episode, from 1990, established a template that contains more information about the show's self-understanding than is typically acknowledged. The framing device positions the show's children as the generators of dark, imaginative content, and the parents as anxious observers from outside the space where that content is generated. The treehouse setting is a private space above the ground, away from the family's house, where the imagination is not managed by adult supervision or social convention. This is a more accurate description of what the show itself is doing than anything in its official premise. The Simpsons has always been most genuinely unsettling when it gives full expression to what its children are thinking, when Bart's hostility and Lisa's clarity and Maggie's silent watching are not moderated by the demands of family comedy. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the annual occasion when the show climbs into that space and says what it has been thinking about in the dark. Specific segments have established details about the show's universe that have then operated as background context in canonical episodes without ever being labeled as canonical. The mythology of Springfield's supernatural susceptibility, its apparent position at the intersection of dimensions, its history of alien contact and demonic incursion and temporal anomaly, has been built almost entirely through the Halloween specials. The canonical show references these elements without explaining them because the explanation exists in the non-canonical stories. The Halloween episodes are a mythology for a town that pretends not to need one. The segment in which Homer sells his soul to the devil for a donut is the most frequently referenced piece of this mythology. It is officially non-canonical. Homer did not literally sell his soul in the show's main continuity, but the story established something about Homer's relationship to consequences and immediate gratification, the specific pattern of thought that chooses the consumable present over the permanent future that has been present in his characterization in canonical episodes ever since. The non-canonical story revealed something canonical about his psychology, and the revelation has stuck regardless of the protective framing. The segments in which Springfield becomes subject to supernatural control, in which its residents are managed by forces they cannot see clearly, function as thought experiments about the canonical town's relationship to its situation. In the Halloween versions, the control is explicit and dramatic. The town is possessed or manipulated by identifiable supernatural entities. In the canonical version, the control is more mundane and more insidious. Economic, environmental, political. The Halloween segment's explicit monstrousness is the canonical show's situation at its logical extreme, the thing the regular episodes approach from a distance made direct and undeniable for one night a year. Homer 3, from the 7th Treehouse of Horror, is one of the most technically and conceptually unusual pieces in the show's history. It placed Homer in a three-dimensional rendered space, using computer graphics that were genuinely sophisticated for 1995, and used that environment to explore something about the show's characters that the main canon has never directly addressed. In the three-dimensional world, Homer is out of his element in the most precise possible sense. He is a two-dimensional figure in a three-dimensional space. He does not belong there. The world around him has depth and solidity that he does not possess, and the contrast between his flatness and the world's depth is both the visual joke and the conceptual point. The segment uses the technology of increasing three-dimensionality, one of the defining trends of mid-1990s visual culture, to depict Homer in a world that does not fit him, a world that has more reality than he was made for. The three-dimensional world eventually consumes and destroys what Homer was in the two-dimensional space, and the destruction is presented with an aesthetic that is equal parts funny and genuinely eerie. The segment is non-canonical, but it articulates something about the show's characters that is true across all their canonical appearances. They are creatures of a specific kind of space, and they are more comfortable and more real within that space than outside it. The specific flatness of Springfield, the particular quality of its unreality, is not a limitation imposed on the characters. It is the medium in which they actually exist. The time travel segments distributed across multiple Treehouse of Horror episodes have collectively established a picture of Springfield's temporal structure that is internally consistent, even though no individual segment is canonical. Time in Springfield is unstable. The town exists in a region where normal temporal causality is susceptible to disruption. History can be revisited and altered in ways that change the present. The future can be glimpsed. Causality is negotiable in Springfield in ways it is not elsewhere. This is officially non-canonical. The time travel in the Halloween specials happens outside the main continuity. But the canonical episodes also feature temporal oddities, moments where the town's history does not quite cohere, where the sequence of established events creates inconsistencies that the main storyline does not address. The non-canonical time travel stories provide, in their extreme and gothic form, the underlying logic that the canonical show implies but never articulates. Springfield has an unstable relationship to time. The Halloween specials are the place where the show is honest about this. The monster versions of Springfield's characters that appear in Halloween segments are, with remarkable consistency, the canonical characters in a universe where the constraints that make them livable have been removed. Homer as a murderous monster is Homer's genuine and occasional capacity for violence, freed from the social and familial moderations that keep it at manageable levels. Bart as a demon is Bart's fundamental hostility toward authority and structure, expressed without the self-awareness that canonical Bart sometimes musters. Lisa as a prophet of doom is Lisa's accurate perception of Springfield's real situation, stripped of the social adaptations that allow her to function in the canonical universe without being destroyed by what she sees. The Halloween versions are not alternate versions. They are the authentic versions in a setting that removes the constraints. The Treehouse of Horror is the place where the show tells you most directly what its characters actually contain, because the Halloween format gives it permission to be direct in ways that the family comedy format cannot accommodate. Burns in his various Halloween incarnations, as vampire, as deity, as death figure, as collector of human beings, represents the most precise of these expressions. Each form is a different representation of what Burns already is in the canonical show. He sustains himself on other people's lives. He holds power over Springfield's residents that approximates the power of fate. He has been alive so long that his relationship to mortality is genuinely different from the people around him. The canonical Burns is already monstrous, in a carefully managed form. The Halloween Burns removes the management and allows the monstrousness its full expression. The Treehouse of Horror episodes whose horror premises are most precisely calibrated to the canonical show's specific anxieties function as psychological portraits of what Springfield's collective unconscious contains. A segment about Springfield's residents being harvested by aliens says what the canonical show suggests throughout its run in attenuated form: that the residents are being used for purposes that do not benefit them, by forces they cannot clearly see. A segment about the dead returning to life expresses the town's inability to let its own history rest, its tendency to have events from earlier in its timeline walk back through the door. A segment about Springfield being sealed in a container expresses the town's isolation, its quality of a world unto itself whose borders cannot be crossed. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are 33 years of the show taking its own deepest concerns and expressing them in the most direct available language, which is the language of horror. The horror format gives the show permission to say directly what the regular format can only suggest. And because the stories are officially non-canonical, The audience is free to receive them as seasonal entertainment without taking them as diagnostic statements about Springfield's real condition, which may be exactly why the show has kept making them every year. The Halloween specials say what cannot be said in the regular format. And then the following week, the regular format resumes and nobody mentions what was revealed in the dark. Section 5. The hidden architecture of Springfield. Springfield has a geography problem. This has been established by fans, by writers, by the show's creator himself, and acknowledged with varying degrees of seriousness by everyone involved. The town borders Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It has an ocean within a reasonable drive, mountains within a reasonable drive, desert within a reasonable drive, and farmland just past the suburb. Its location has been described differently in different episodes, and the one time its creator gave a definitive answer in a published interview, the show almost immediately contradicted it with subsequent episodes that place the town in geographic contexts incompatible with the declared state. The fans who have tried to map Springfield are legion. They have been patient, dedicated, and creative in their attempts to reconcile hundreds of episodes worth of spatial information into something coherent. They have all failed, in the precise sense that no map can accommodate all the information the show provides without encountering contradictions. Some building is always in the wrong place. Some location is always too close or too far from some other location. Some distance that one episode establishes is contradicted by a different episode that the fan must choose to ignore or reconcile through improbable means. But the geography problem, looked at carefully, is not random. The contradictions have a character. The town is wrong in specific ways that are consistent across its history, and the specific ways it is wrong are revealing about what Springfield actually is and what the show understands about fictional space. The nuclear power plant is always to the north of the residential areas. This is among the most consistent spatial facts in the show's history, and it is not consistent by accident. The plant is upstream. Whatever flows from it, whatever material escapes its cracked infrastructure, flows down toward the community that depends on it. The relationship between the plant and the town is not merely economic, it is directional, and the direction has been held constant across the show's entire geography variable history because the direction is the point. Many of Springfield's locations have a quality of being where the story needs them, rather than where a fixed geography would place them. The school is close to the Simpson house when the story requires quick transitions between home and school, and it is across town when the story needs the school to feel like a destination requiring some effort to reach. The hospital is accessible when someone needs to get there quickly, and distant when the story needs the journey to be an ordeal. Springfield's spatial relationships respond to the narrative's needs. This is the spatial logic of a place that exists as a setting for stories rather than as a physical location independent of those stories. In a real town, the distance between two locations is fixed by geography and does not change based on what the people making that journey need to happen to them on the way. In Springfield, the distance is negotiable because the town's purpose is to serve the stories that happen inside it, and stories need different spatial relationships at different moments. The consistency within this variability is the interesting thing. The elements the show has chosen to keep spatially consistent are the elements that carry meaning beyond their narrative function. The plant's position to the north, the accessibility of Moe's to Homer from any starting point, the accessibility of the family home from wherever Homer happens to be at the end of an episode. These fixed elements are fixed because they are symbolic rather than simply geographic. The nuclear plant's architecture is among the show's most carefully maintained visual elements. Its exterior, the cooling towers and domed structures that dominate Springfield's skyline in establishing shots, has been consistent across the entire run of the show. Its visual identity is fixed even when the geography around it is variable. But the plant's interior is a different matter entirely. Inside the plant, the spaces are vast and inconsistent, containing rooms that could not physically fit inside the exterior shell, extending underground to depths not suggested by the surface, connecting to surrounding areas through tunnels and passages that imply a subterranean infrastructure that Springfield's surface never acknowledges. The plant is visually defined on the surface and architecturally impossible beneath it, which is precisely the relationship that the plant has to Springfield's life more broadly. A fixed and familiar surface presence concealing something much larger and less controlled underneath. The Simpson house's interior is inconsistent in ways that track with what is emotionally significant about each space. The rooms that matter to Homer's experience of home are spatially consistent. The living room with its couch and television, the kitchen with its table, the staircase that goes up from roughly the same position in every episode. The rooms that are less emotionally central, the bedrooms whose contents vary, the hallways whose lengths change between episodes, the basement whose size is whatever the episode needs it to be, are spatially variable because they are not the architecture of Homer's emotional home, only of the physical building that contains it. This distinction, the emotionally central spaces being spatially fixed and the peripheral spaces being variable, describes something real about how people experience domestic space. The rooms that matter to you are the rooms you can navigate in the dark. Their proportions are in your body. The other rooms are known more abstractly, accessed when needed, and not otherwise mapped in memory. The Springfield house's spatial inconsistency is a portrait of how domestic space is actually experienced by someone who lives inside it. The cemetery that appears across several episodes occupies a geographic position that is both peripheral and meaningful. It is at the edge of town, removed from the commercial and social center, where cemeteries usually are. But it is also, in the episodes that visit it, a place where the show's various historical threads converge. Characters visit relatives. History is physically present in the form of inscribed stone. Springfield's dead are accessible in the cemetery in a way that Springfield's living history is generally not accessible in the town's active life. The cemetery contains markers for characters the show has killed, for historical Springfielders whose histories have been referenced but never fully depicted, and for events in the town's past that are permanently recorded even though the living community has long since stopped discussing them. It is Springfield's most honest archive. The town has a profound capacity for collective forgetting, for voting to suppress inconvenient truths, for treating the agreed-upon version of events as more real than the events themselves. The cemetery cannot participate in this collective forgetting. The inscriptions it contains are permanent, and they say what actually happened, and anyone who visits can read them. Springfield's civic buildings, the library and museum and concert hall, and courthouse and town hall, have a particular relationship to the town's geography because they materialize when the story needs them and are not otherwise present. The library exists when someone needs to do research. The museum appears when someone needs to encounter art or natural history. This intermittent existence is partly the necessary economy of a fictional setting, which cannot maintain complete visual consistency across hundreds of episodes produced over decades. But it also describes something about what these institutions are in Springfield. They exist. They are present. But they exist at the margins of daily life, accessible when needed and not otherwise integrated into the town's active social fabric. This is the civic architecture of a community that acknowledges the value of cultural and educational institutions in principle without quite believing in them enough to keep them continuously present. Springfield has a library because the idea of a library is part of what a town is supposed to be. The library is there when you need it. When you do not need it, it has retreated back into the background of a town that does not think about it. The bus route that Otto drives across Springfield is one of the show's most geographically impossible journeys. It connects locations that could not be connected by a single route in any real American town, without requiring either extraordinary travel time or a geography that defies mapping. But it is also one of the show's most consistent community connectors. The bus passes through multiple neighborhoods and social zones. It links characters from different parts of Springfield's social geography in a daily circuit that creates the sense of a town that is actually connected, where people from different circumstances and different neighborhoods are regularly moved through each other's vicinity. The bus's route is impossible by any literal measurement. By the logic of what the show needs, it is exactly right. Springfield needs to feel like a community whose different parts are in contact with each other, and the bus provides that contact across a geography that cannot accommodate it by any real measurement. This is the show choosing what is needed over what is accurate, which is the correct choice for a fictional setting whose purpose is to serve the stories that happen in it. The geometry of Springfield is the geometry of a place that exists in service of its own stories. It bends and stretches and contracts in response to what those stories require. It maintains fixed what needs to be fixed and releases what does not. It places the plant upstream and the bar accessible and the home findable, and it does not worry about reconciling these fixed elements into a coherent map because the coherence of Springfield is not geographic. It is emotional. It is the coherence of a place that always has what it needs to tell the next story, which is the only kind of coherence that a fictional setting actually requires. End section. WC, W home, Claude, sections 2 to 5, TXT. Section 6. The writers hiding in plain sight. The Simpsons has always been a show about a specific place and a specific family, but it has also, quietly and consistently across its entire history, been a show about the people who made it. This is not unusual for long-running television comedies. Writers embed themselves in their work. They name characters after people they know, set scenes in streets they have walked, give characters problems that are their own problems, wearing narrative costumes. The autobiographical content of television comedy is rarely hidden with much conviction, and the people looking for it have generally found it without too much difficulty. But the ways in which the people behind The Simpsons have embedded themselves in the show are more varied, more technically inventive, and more deliberately layered than the typical television equivalent. They have used the show's scale, its longevity, and the specific creative conventions of animation to place themselves inside Springfield, in ways that are sometimes obvious to nobody and sometimes completely obvious to anyone who knows where to look. Begin with names, because names are the most consistent and most visible of the tools the show has used to mark its own territory. The town of Springfield is named after the town visible from Matt Groening's childhood home in Portland, Oregon. Springfield being the kind of specific and ordinary American place name that is simultaneously meaningful to the person choosing it and anonymous enough to function as a general placeholder. This naming convention extends throughout the show. Characters are named after streets in Portland that Groening grew up near, streets that mean something to the person using them as a naming system, because they are the geography of a specific childhood, and that mean nothing to anyone else because they are just street names in a mid-sized northwestern city. Flanders Street in Portland is real. Lovejoy is a street name Groening grew up near. Burns and Quimby are Portland neighborhood names. Kearney is a Portland street. Van Houten is Portland geography. Bouvier is Portland geography. Hibbert is Portland geography. The social landscape of Springfield, its roster of named characters, is an encrypted map of a specific childhood neighborhood, readable only by someone who grew up on those streets, or who has cross-referenced the show's character names against a Portland city map, which someone inevitably did. The encryption is the point. The names are both a personal memorial to a specific geography of childhood and a practical naming system for a fictional town. They work at both levels simultaneously. To most of the audience, they are just names, the right kind of ordinary American names for this kind of ordinary American town. To the person who placed them there, they are something else, a private map, a set of coordinates, a way of saying this place was made from a real place, and here is where the real place was. Al Jean, who has been running the show as its executive producer since the early seasons with intervals of absence, has spent more time shaping Springfield than any other individual writer. The specific quality of the show's observational humor in its peak seasons, the particular way it looks at American institutional life with an eye that is simultaneously affectionate and unsparing, owes as much to Gene's sensibility as to any other single influence. Gene has placed himself in the show in a variety of ways, some of which he has acknowledged and some of which require cross-referencing his personal history with the show's content to identify. His Jewish identity has expressed itself in the show's handling of Jewish characters and Jewish cultural material in ways that have been acknowledged, but it has also expressed itself more quietly in the specific quality of the show's humor about failure, about the gap between aspiration and outcome, about the comedy that emerges from watching intelligent people be ineffective in the face of circumstances that resist intelligence. This is a register of humor with a specific cultural history, and the people who recognize the register recognize where it comes from. The show's writing rooms across different seasons have left their specific fingerprints on the show in ways that can be identified by attentive viewers who have watched the full history. The early season writing room produced humor with a specific quality, grounded in domestic observation, concerned with economic anxiety, connected to a working-class experience of American family life that the show treated with genuine respect. The humor of this period is precise in a way that precision comedy is usually not. Precise about what the anxiety of being slightly behind financially feels like from the inside, precise about the specific kinds of stupidity that express themselves as survival strategies in people of limited resources and education, precise about the emotional texture of a marriage between two people who chose each other well and continue to be surprised by how differently they experience the world. Later writing rooms produced humor with different preoccupations. The comedy became more referential, more willing to step outside the family's experience and engage with the wider cultural landscape. The specific anxiety of limited resources was replaced by a more generalized comedy of incongruity. These are changes that can be tracked in the show's content, and they correspond to changes in the rooms that produce the content. The show has also used background material to honor specific individuals from its own history. Writers who contributed substantially to the show and later moved on, directors who shaped the show's visual language, voice performers who gave characters their signatures. The show has commemorated these people in ways that live in the background. A sign on a building is named for a specific departed writer. A location used in a specific episode corresponds to a place that had significance to a specific production team member. The background of Springfield contains memorials that are legible only to the people being memorialized, and to anyone who knows the history well enough to decode them. The process of referencing real places in the animation has been consistent across the show's history and has provided the production team with a way of embedding specific geographic realities inside a show whose geography is deliberately vague. Buildings in Springfield's skyline sometimes correspond to specific buildings in real American cities, simplified and recontextualized but recognizable to people familiar with those cities. The visual language of Springfield's commercial districts borrows specific elements from specific American commercial strip cultures, specific colors, specific signage conventions, specific architectural details that are regional tells visible to the regional eye. This practice of borrowing from specific real places while maintaining the fiction of Springfield's nowhere in particularness is one of the show's most sophisticated visual operations. Springfield looks like every American commercial district because it has been assembled from pieces of many American commercial districts. The person who grew up near a specific kind of American strip mall sees something familiar in Springfield's commercial background. So does the person who grew up near a completely different kind of American strip mall. The show achieves the universal by being specific about many different things simultaneously. The music of the show has always been a vehicle for personal expression by its composers, in ways that are mostly invisible to the general audience. Danny Elfman's original theme is so embedded in cultural memory that most people experience it as the sound of The Simpsons, rather than as the work of a specific composer with a specific artistic history. But the theme contains Elfman's musical fingerprints, the specific relationship between the orchestral writing and the melody, the harmonic language of the chord progressions, the rhythmic quirks that make the theme feel off-kilter in ways that most listeners sense without identifying. Elfman has discussed the theme as a piece that came to him quickly, and the quickness is visible in its specific quality of feeling immediately right in a way that labored music rarely does. Alf Clausen, who scored the show for decades, embedded himself in the scoring in ways that are more visible to musical listeners than to general audiences. His approach to scoring specific kinds of scenes left consistent signatures. The specific orchestral textures he chose for moments of Homer's emotional vulnerability, the particular rhythmic approaches to action sequences, the harmonic language he brought to Springfield's more surreal moments. These signatures are consistent enough across his long tenure that the episodes he scored have a specific sonic character distinguishable from episodes scored with different approaches, and that character reflects his musical personality as directly as any overtly personal work would. Writers have used the show's opening chalkboard to place tributes and references that are visible to anyone but decipherable only by specific people. A sentence written for a specific reason, in the format of a punishment sentence, is available to the entire audience at face value and available to a smaller audience at its actual meaning simultaneously. The chalkboard has been used to say goodbye to colleagues who are leaving, to acknowledge personal events in the writers' lives, to reference things that were being discussed in the writing room that week but that would find no other outlet in the episode's main content. The animation style of specific episodes carries the specific aesthetic choices of the directors who made them. David Silverman's episodes have a visual character. Mark Kirkland's episodes have a different visual character. The directors of The Simpsons have been directing the same characters in the same setting for long enough that the differences in how each director sees those characters and that setting have accumulated into genuine style distinctions that regular viewers intuit without consciously identifying. An episode directed by a specific director has the light and the movement and the specific quality of visual attention of a specific person working in a specific way, and that person's presence in the work is visible even when they are not visually present in it. The show has periodically made episodes that are more explicitly autobiographical, not in the sense that their content directly represents events from specific writers' lives, but in the sense that their emotional concerns are specific in a way that general satire is not. The episodes that handle grief with particular care are the ones made by writers who were grieving. The episodes that engage with questions of creative failure and professional obsolescence are the ones made by writers who were asking those questions about themselves. The episodes that deal most directly with the complexity of family love, with the specific dynamic between parents who love each other and children who are becoming separate people in ways the parents cannot fully accommodate, are the ones made by writers who were experiencing exactly that dynamic in their own lives. The show is autobiographical in the way that all durable creative work is autobiographical, not in its specific events but in its emotional intelligence, which can only come from somewhere, which is always coming from the specific experiences of the specific people who are doing the work of imagining it. The recurring motif of Homer reaching for something and missing is one of the show's most enduring visual jokes and one of its most consistent metaphors. It appears in many contexts: reaching for food, reaching for Bart, reaching for a goal he almost manages to achieve before it recedes just beyond his grasp. The motion is Homer's. The reach that comes close and the missing that is then also somehow fine, somehow recoverable, somehow not the end. This motion is funny because of the consistency of the missing, but it is also the show's embedded statement about what it means to be Homer, which is to say what it means to be a certain kind of person in a certain kind of life. The reach is genuine, the missing is structural, and the continuing is not giving up, but the specific resilience of someone who has reorganized their relationship to the gap between what they reach for and what they actually hold. This is the show writing about itself as much as about Homer. The show has been reaching for 36 years, at various things, at the kinds of humor it achieved in its peak seasons, at the emotional truth it managed in its best episodes, at the consistent quality of something that is genuinely difficult to maintain across a body of work this long and this voluminous. The reach is real, the missing is part of the history, and the show continues, which is its own kind of statement about what you do when the gap between what you wanted to make and what you actually made is part of the story. The Simpsons has been made, for 36 years, by people who put themselves in it. They put themselves in the names of streets, and the books on shelves, and the signs on storefronts, and the sentences on the chalkboard, and the jokes in the background, and the emotional intelligence of scenes that know specific things about specific kinds of pain because the people making them knew those things personally. The show is full of its makers in the way that all good work is full of its makers, which is to say completely and mostly invisibly, and in ways that only partially correspond to what anyone would tell you if you asked them directly about it. Springfield is not a real place, but it was made by real people, and the people who made it are in the walls. Section 7. The Music Mysteries. There is a piece of music that has been playing at the beginning of The Simpsons since 1989, and most people have never heard it. Not the theme. The theme is the most heard piece of music in American television history, played at the beginning of nearly 800 episodes across 36 years, embedded in the cultural nervous system of every person who has spent time near a television since the late 1980s. Most people can hear the first 3 notes and complete the rest in their heads. The theme is not hidden. The theme is unavoidable. What is less heard is everything underneath the theme, the compositional choices that make it feel the way it feels, the specific harmonic and rhythmic decisions that create its particular quality of simultaneously joyful and off-kilter, familiar and slightly strange. These choices are audible. They are present in what everyone hears, but they are registered below the threshold of conscious attention in most listeners, processed as the emotional texture of the music, without being identified as the specific technical choices that produce that texture. The Simpsons theme is in a major key, which is the key of happiness, in the most basic emotional grammar of Western music. But the melody moves in ways that a simple happiness does not. It reaches for notes that are slightly past where you would expect it to go, and then resolves in ways that are surprising enough to register as clever, but not surprising enough to feel wrong. This quality of slightly more than expected is present in the theme's melody, in its harmony, in the specific orchestration choices that give different instruments different voices in the texture. The theme sounds happy because it is in a major key. It sounds like something specific about Springfield because it is doing more than being in a major key. Danny Elfman wrote the theme in the early hours of a single morning, working from a request that gave him more freedom than most television theme commissions allow. What Groening asked for was a theme that would convey the family's personality and the show's world in under a minute. And what Elfman produced was a theme that conveys something more specific and more difficult than that. It conveys the experience of watching this show, the combination of warmth and absurdity and slight wrongness that is Springfield's emotional signature. The orchestration is classical in its deployment of a full orchestra, but its specific voice choices are not what a classical composer writing in 1989 would have chosen. The xylophone is prominent in a way that gives the theme a slightly toy-like quality, the quality of something meant to be fun without being weighty. The brass make declarations in ways that are slightly too grand for what they are declaring, producing a comedy of instrumental scale-to-subject mismatch that is audible even to listeners who could not name the effect they are experiencing. The strings provide warmth without providing sentimentality, which is a delicate balance to achieve in a few seconds of music and which Elfman found without apparent difficulty. The theme's endurance across 36 years of the show's history has required it to be performed in different contexts, by different configurations of musicians, with the show's different seasons of production each bringing slightly different technical parameters to the recording. This means the theme exists in multiple recorded versions, each slightly different from the others in ways that are generally inaudible to listeners who are not listening with the specific attention of someone trying to compare versions. The differences exist in the specific quality of the orchestral sound, in the balance between instrumental voices, in the slight rhythmic variations that emerge from different conductors and different session musicians approaching the same notation. Most listeners experience all these versions as the same theme, which is the correct experience. But within the sameness, variations have accumulated that constitute a history of the theme's performance across the show's run, a history that lives below the threshold of what the casual listener tracks. Alf Clausen, who scored the episodes themselves for most of the show's history, developed a scoring practice that is among the most technically sophisticated in the history of American animated television. The Simpsons episodes are scored to picture, which means the music is composed and recorded after the animation is complete, synchronized to the specific timing of individual scenes. This is standard practice. What is less standard is the density of musical thought Clausen brought to each scene, the specific attention he gave to what the music was doing emotionally in relation to what the animation was doing visually. Springfield has a musical language. It has specific themes associated with specific characters and locations and emotional states, and these themes have been developed and varied across hundreds of episodes in ways that classical composers call thematic development, but that animation scoring rarely practices at this level of sustained commitment. Homer has a theme, Burns has a theme, the Power Plant has a musical identity, Moe's Tavern has a musical identity, Springfield Elementary has a musical identity. These identities have been maintained and evolved across decades of scoring in ways that create a musical continuity running beneath the show's surface that is audible to listeners who have paid attention to the scoring for long, enough to carry these themes in memory. The Homer theme, which is deployed at moments of Homer's triumph, vulnerability, stupidity, and love, with different orchestration each time to convey the emotional difference between these contexts, is one of the richest examples. The theme's core material is the same across all its deployments, but the specific orchestral dressing transforms it. The Triumph deployment uses brass. The Vulnerability deployment uses a solo instrument, often a woodwind with a plaintive quality, played at a tempo that makes the melody move more slowly than usual. The Stupidity deployment uses the same theme at a tempo and with instrumentation that makes it feel lighter, more slapstick, more appropriate to the comic context. The Love deployment uses strings and achieves in a few seconds of music what many extended emotional scenes in other shows fail to achieve in much longer durations. The scoring of the show's most emotional moments has been one of its most quietly powerful artistic achievements across its history. The music in the show's best episodes of its earlier seasons functions in the specific way that the best film scoring functions. Not by telling you what to feel about what you are watching, but by opening a space in which the feeling that is already present in the scene can be more fully received. The scoring does not add emotion that is not in the scene. It removes the distance between the viewer and the emotion that is already there. This distinction is easy to underestimate. Most television scoring adds emotion. It tells you that this moment is sad by playing music that is recognizably sad, using musical conventions that signal grief, or tenderness, or happiness, in the way that certain musical combinations have conventionally come to signal those things. The music is functioning as a label for the emotion, a guide to what you are supposed to be feeling. Clausen's best work with The Simpsons does something different. It functions as an amplifier for emotion that the scene has already established through animation and writing and voice performance, intensifying what is present without directing what it should be. The episode's end credits have carried a consistent musical identity across the show's history, variations on the main theme and associated musical materials that play over the scrolling names and then resolve as the screen goes to black. These credit sequences have occasionally been used for things beyond their stated function. Tributes to departed cast and crew members have appeared in the end credits music, where the musical choices acknowledge a loss in ways that the episode's content could not accommodate. The music of the end credits can be elegiac in specific ways without requiring the episode to be elegiac in its main story. Guest musicians and composers have periodically been involved in the show's music in ways that go beyond the obvious appearances of musician characters in story episodes. The show has always had a sophisticated relationship with music as cultural artifact, understanding pop music and classical music and jazz and folk and country as things that carry information about the people and communities that produce them. When these musical forms appear in the show's scoring, they carry their cultural associations with them, and those associations are part of what the scene is communicating. A scene that is scored with a honky-tonk piano is communicating something about the social register of its context through the musical choice alone. A scene scored with a classical string quartet is doing the same. A scene scored with a single acoustic guitar is making a different set of associations than either of those options. Clausen and his collaborators understood this consistently and made scoring choices that were always in conversation with the cultural meanings of the musical forms they were using. Lisa's relationship to music is one of the show's deepest ongoing thematic concerns, and the show's treatment of it through the actual music she plays is more careful than most viewers have registered. Lisa plays the alto saxophone, and the specific musical character of what she plays has been consistent across the show's history in ways that track with her character's emotional state. In her earlier episodes, her playing is more formally accomplished, technically confident, stylistically grounded in the jazz tradition she has explicitly been established to love. In later episodes, her playing sometimes reflects the complexity of her situation, technically still accomplished but reaching toward expressions that the formal language she has learned does not quite accommodate. This is the show using actual musical substance to track a character's development, which requires both musical sophistication on the production side and willingness to pay attention to the sound itself, rather than just to the narrative presence of the instrument. Most viewers hear Lisa play and register that she is playing. Attentive listeners hear what she is playing and register that it is saying something about who she is in this specific episode. The show's relationship to specific genres of American popular music has been a consistent source of both humor and genuine musical engagement. When the show deploys country music, it deploys it correctly, using the specific conventions of the form in ways that are legible to country music listeners, even when the deployment is comic. When it deploys hip-hop, it deploys conventions that were specific to the hip-hop of a particular moment, a specificity that dates those deployments precisely, but that also marks them as actual engagements with the form rather than approximations. When it deploys classical music in specific, recognizable pieces, the choices are never random. The specific piece is always chosen for what it brings to the scene beyond just the cultural status of being classical music. The music of Springfield, taken across the show's entire history as a body of scored content, is one of the most substantial achievements in American television music. It has been produced across decades by skilled and attentive musicians who understood the show's emotional range and who gave that range musical form with care and consistency. Most of it will never be listened to as music, in the way that film soundtracks are sometimes listened to outside their visual context. It lives inside the show, inside the specific seconds of animation it was written to accompany, inseparable from the images it was made to serve. But it is there. Every episode of The Simpsons contains music that was made for it specifically, music that is doing specific emotional work in every scene it plays under, music that knows things about the characters and the situations it is accompanying, and that says those things in sound rather than in words. Most viewers have been receiving this music for 36 years, without quite knowing they were receiving it. The body responds to music that the mind does not consciously track. The emotional intelligence of a well-scored scene is available to you even when you are not listening specifically for it. The scoring of The Simpsons has been shaping how its audience feels about Springfield for over 3 decades, in frequencies too deep for most of the audience to consciously identify, which is exactly where the best music does its best work. There is a piece of music that plays at the end of Maggie's scenes in certain episodes, a brief melodic phrase that has no lyrics and that appears for a few seconds and then is gone. The phrase is always the same. It has appeared across many seasons in scenes that share the quality of Maggie being present and significant in a way that the adults around her are not noticing. The music marks the moments of her importance without announcing them. It is a signature that identifies her presence to the audience in the way that leitmotifs identify specific characters in operatic music, but it is quiet enough that most viewers have not consciously identified it as a recurring element rather than just as a nice piece of music that happens to appear sometimes. The phrase has been analyzed by musically attentive fans who cross-referenced its appearances with the specific content of the scenes it accompanies. The consistency of its deployment, across many seasons and many composers and many scoring sessions, suggests that it was identified as Maggie's theme early in the show's history, and maintained as such even as other musical elements of the show evolved around it. It is one of the show's most quietly sustained musical commitments, a theme for a character who has no theme in any official documentation, maintained for decades in the scoring of a show that has never acknowledged it exists. Section 8. The Unresolved Storylines. The Simpsons has been telling stories for 36 years, and it has not finished all of them. This is not a criticism. It is an observation about what happens to a show that runs long enough and that takes its characters seriously enough to give them histories that extend beyond any single episode's capacity to resolve. The Simpsons has introduced storylines that were never completed. It has planted seeds that were never watered. It has built toward things that never arrived. The accumulated total of unresolved narrative threads across the show's history is substantial, and living inside those threads is some of the most interesting material the show has ever generated. The relationship between Homer and his mother Mona is among the show's most genuinely unresolved long-form storylines, not because Mona's arc was never completed, but because Homer's relationship to what she represented was never fully explored, even after her arc concluded. When Mona died, in a later season episode that handled her departure with unusual emotional care, Homer's response was grief of a specific and complex kind. Grief for the mother he had, grief for the years they missed, and something more complicated underneath both of those. Homer never fully processed the information that his mother's absence from his childhood was not her failure to love him, but the consequence of a specific political act and a specific powerful man's retaliation. He received this information. He cried when he received it. He understood it intellectually in the way that someone of Homer's cognitive capacity can understand things intellectually, which is to say approximately and without the full depth of integration that the information deserved. But the show never gave Homer an episode in which the full weight of this information landed on him in a way that changed how he understood his own life. The realization that Burns was the cause of his maternal abandonment should have been one of the most significant realizations of Homer's adult life. The show visited this realization and then moved on. Homer went back to work at the plant on Monday. The show had an episode the following week about something else. The thread of what it means to spend your adult life working for the person who destroyed your childhood is still dangling somewhere in Springfield, unpulled. Lisa's political and ethical evolution is one of the show's richest ongoing narrative concerns, and it is also one of the areas where the floating timeline creates the most frustrating structural limitation. Lisa has been developing positions, commitments, and philosophical frameworks across many seasons that should, in the logic of character development, be building towards something. But the floating timeline prevents the accumulation from reaching its destination. She cannot graduate. She cannot grow up and find out whether the positions she has been building are adequate to the adult world she is growing toward. The show has given glimpses of adult Lisa in flash-forward episodes, and those glimpses are both generous and insufficient. They tell you what she becomes. They do not tell you how she gets there, what the journey from 8 years old to adult actually contains, what she learns along the way that her childhood preparation for it did not cover. The arc of Lisa's development is the most developed and most permanently suspended arc in the show's history, a Bildungsroman with its middle permanently withheld. Bart's potential is one of the show's most consistently introduced and most consistently unresolved themes. Across many episodes, the show has established that Bart possesses capabilities that his performance in the school system does not reflect: spatial intelligence, social intelligence, leadership capacity, athletic potential, creative aptitude in certain specific directions. He is not stupid. He is something different from what the school is testing for, and what he actually is has been shown across many episodes without being assembled into anything like a complete picture of who Bart could become. The episode in which Bart discovers a talent for architecture, and in which an adult architect takes him seriously enough to mentor him briefly, is one of the clearest examples of the show introducing a direction for Bart and then not taking it. The direction is established with enough care to be credible. The mentor is a real character rather than a plot device. The capacity Bart demonstrates is specific and genuine, not just generic intelligence, but a particular kind of spatial and structural thinking that real architects possess. And then the episode ends, and the direction is not pursued, because the show cannot pursue it without the pursuit making Bart into a different character than the one the next episode needs him to be. The accumulation of these abandoned directions creates a portrait of Bart as someone whose potential has been encountered and released many times, someone who is consistently capable of more than his life accommodates, and consistently return to the baseline position from which the next episode can begin. This is the tragedy of the floating timeline in its most specific form. A character who reaches the edge of becoming something and is pulled back from it not by anything in the story, but by the structure of the storytelling. Marge's own ambitions and frustrated potential constitute one of the show's most recurring unresolved threads. Across many episodes, she has discovered capacities and interests outside her domestic role: painting, law enforcement, casino work, nuclear plant employment, professional bowling, real estate. Each discovery is given space and seriousness. The show takes Marge's competence in each new area seriously, rather than playing it as a joke at her expense. And each episode ends with Marge returning to the role she began in, not defeated but not changed either, the discovery having demonstrated something without the demonstration changing what comes next. What the show has never resolved is the question of what Marge wants. Not what she does or what she discovers she is capable of, but what she actually, in some interior sense that the show approaches and then retreats from, wants for herself. Her love for her family is not the same thing as a want for her own life. The two can coexist without conflict, and the show generally allows them to coexist without requiring Marge to choose between them. But the question underneath her recurring discoveries of capability and interest, the question that each episode approaches before retreating, is whether there is a version of Marge's life that gives her the things her domestic role does not give her, without requiring her to abandon the domestic role that is also genuinely important to her. The show has introduced this question many times. It has never answered it. The answer would require either Marge to remain exactly as she is, which would be a resolution of a kind, or Marge to change in ways that the show's structure cannot accommodate. So the question hangs in the space between episodes, asked and re-asked and never given its answer. The friendship between Homer and Lenny and Carl is one of the show's most quietly rich ongoing relationships and one of its most permanently unresolved character studies. Lenny and Carl have been Homer's co-workers and friends for the show's entire run. They share the booth at Moe's. They are present at every significant event. They are as integrated into Homer's daily life as Marge and the children. But what is their life when Homer is not in the scene? The show has visited this question in episodes specifically focused on one or both of them, and what those episodes reveal is sufficiently interesting to make the absence of more exploration genuinely regrettable. Carl in particular has been shown to have a history and a set of preoccupations and a relationship to his own background that is more textured than his role as Homer's co-worker friend suggests. He has roots in Iceland. He has family. He has a relationship to his own identity that occasionally breaks through the surface of his role in Homer's social circle and reveals a person whose inner life is richer than the show has ever given itself the time to fully explore. The relationship between Sideshow Bob and Bart is one of the show's most formally resolved relationships and one of its most spiritually unresolved. Bob has been defeated by Bart many times across many episodes. His plans are elaborate his intelligence genuine, his capability real, and yet Bart consistently defeats him through a combination of luck and intuition and the specific indestructibility of a child who has not yet learned that the world's actual adversaries can win. What the show has never resolved is what Bob and Bart's relationship would look like in any context outside the adversarial one. There have been brief episodes that have approached this, episodes in which circumstances force some form of cooperation, in which something like mutual recognition happens between them before the adversarial logic reasserts itself. These approaches are among the most interesting things the show has done with both characters, and they have been visited and released in ways that suggest the show is not quite ready to take seriously what it might mean if the adversarial relationship were actually transformed into something else, what the two of them would look like in a world where the chasing had stopped. Springfield's relationship to its own history is one of the deepest structural unresolved threads in the entire show. Because the show has spent 36 seasons establishing that Springfield has a history and simultaneously that the town is constitutionally unable to maintain continuous access to that history. Events happen and are forgotten. Catastrophes occur and are absorbed. The physical evidence of the town's history exists in its cemetery and its architecture and its older residents' memories, and the town collectively decides not to examine any of it. This is an unresolved thread of the kind that cannot be resolved without the show ending, which means it will remain unresolved as long as the show continues. The resolution would require Springfield to finally look at itself, to maintain the memory of what has happened to it and to draw the conclusions that memory would produce. And that resolution is precisely the thing the show cannot allow, because it would make Springfield into a different kind of place. A place that can be held accountable, a place where time actually passes and leaves its mark. The show has been building toward this resolution for 36 years and has been preventing it for the same length of time. The unresolved thread of Springfield's self-knowledge is the show's central ongoing project, and the impossibility of its resolution is the show's central ongoing condition. Ned Flanders' relationship to Faith is one of the show's most carefully built and most persistently unresolved character studies. The show has established, across many episodes, that Ned's faith is genuine, that it is important to him in ways that are not merely conventional, that it constitutes the foundation of how he navigates a life that has given him persistent and specific reasons to question whether the foundation is holding. But the show has also established, across the same body of episodes, that Ned's faith is not answered in any of the ways that would make it legible as a functional response to the world he actually lives in. God speaks to Homer, who is not seeking the conversation. God does not speak to Ned, who is the most devout man in Springfield, receives silence from the deity he has organized his entire life around. The show has placed this fact in the story without resolving it, and the placement has been deliberate enough and consistent enough to be a statement rather than an oversight. What would it mean for the show to resolve Ned's relationship to faith? It would mean either the faith being answered, which would require a kind of supernatural commitment the show generally avoids outside of Halloween special contexts, or the faith being broken, which would be a different kind of show from the one that has existed for 36 years. So Ned continues to pray, and to receive silence, and to maintain his faith in the face of that silence, and the show continues to look at him doing this without saying what it thinks about what he is doing. The unresolved threads of The Simpsons are not failures of storytelling. They are the evidence of a show that has taken its characters seriously enough to give them more history and more depth and more unfinished business than any story structure can fully accommodate. The best characters always have more inside them than the stories that contain them. Springfield's residents have been accumulating that interior surplus for 36 years, and the accumulated unresolved content of their histories is one of the show's most substantial and most quietly affecting achievements. The threads will not all be resolved. The floating timeline prevents it, the show's structure prevents it, and perhaps the most honest response to this reality is also the most appropriate one. Some things do not resolve. Some questions do not get answered. Some characters carry their unresolved business their entire lives without the resolution arriving, and the carrying is part of what their lives are, and the audience that has watched them carry it for 36 years has been watching something true about how lives are actually organized around the things that do not conclude. Springfield keeps its threads open because open threads are what living looks like from the inside. And the audience, carrying its own unresolved threads into the viewing room week after week and year after year, has recognized this. Section 9. The Guest Star Easter Eggs. The Simpsons has had more guest stars than any other show in the history of American television. And this is not quite an accurate description of what has happened across the show's history, with the people who have come into Springfield from outside. The show has had guest appearances from hundreds of people across 36 seasons. Some of these appearances are what they appear to be: famous people playing versions of themselves, providing the show with a celebrity presence that the story treats as a celebrity presence. The character is a famous person. The famous person is in the episode. The joke is generally about what that famous person represents culturally, about what happens when that cultural representation is placed in contact with Springfield's specific reality. But the most interesting guest appearances across the show's history are the ones where something else is happening underneath the surface deployment of the celebrity. The ones where the famous person is being used for more than their fame, where the episode understands something about who they actually are, what they have actually done, what their work or life has actually meant, and where that understanding is built into the appearance in ways that are legible to viewers who share the understanding and invisible to viewers who do not. The musicians who have appeared in the show are the richest single category in this respect, because the show's relationship to music is sophisticated enough that it can do real things with musicians rather than simply using their presence as cultural decoration. When Sonic Youth appeared in the show, the episode gave them material that reflected a genuine understanding of what Sonic Youth was, their relationship to indie rock culture, their specific position in the music landscape of that moment, the kind of audience they attracted, and what that audience's relationship to them meant. The episode was not using Sonic Youth as generic rock band stand-ins. It was using Sonic Youth as specifically themselves, and the specificity required someone on the writing side to have paid attention to what made them specifically themselves. The same quality appears in the deployments of musicians from different genres across the show's history. Johnny Cash's appearance was not Johnny Cash providing a famous voice for a spiritual function. It was the show doing something specific with what Johnny Cash represented, the specific register of American experience he embodied, the music he made, and what it meant about the part of American life it came from. The quality of his voice as a cultural instrument and not just as a pleasant sound. The episode that used Cash used him because what he represented was exactly right for what the episode was doing, and the rightness came from knowing what he represented. Paul and Linda McCartney appeared in an episode that was specifically about Lisa's vegetarianism, and their appearance was right in a way that went beyond their fame. The McCartneys were advocates for vegetarianism in their actual lives, in their actual marriage, with a conviction that was genuine rather than performative, and the episode knew this and used this. Paul McCartney improvising a verse about the meatless lamb was not a random famous musician adding comedy to a scene. It was the show using a specific person's actual position on an actual issue to add substance to a story that was about that issue. The guest appearance and the episode's content were in genuine conversation. The appearances of figures from outside entertainment, politicians and scientists and writers and activists, are the category where the embedded content is most consistently substantive and most consistently missed by viewers who are receiving the appearance at face value. Stephen Hawking appeared across multiple episodes, and his appearances contained material that reflected a genuine engagement with his actual scientific work and his actual personality, his wit and his self-awareness about his public identity, and his relationship to the gap between what his disease had taken from him and what his mind retained. The show was not using Hawking as a famous scientist stand-in. It was using the specific Hawking, the person who combined extraordinary scientific achievement with a specific kind of dry humor about his own situation, who was aware of what he represented to people and who engaged with that representation with intelligence and irony. This quality of genuine specificity in guest appearances is the difference between a show that uses famous people as props and a show that uses famous people as characters. The Simpsons at its best has always been doing the latter, and the evidence is in the episodes that have done it. The ones where the famous person is not just present, but specifically right, where the episode knows what they are and engages with what they are rather than simply with the fact of their fame. The recurring appearances of certain guests across multiple episodes create a different kind of depth than single appearances can. A famous person who appears once is present in a single episode. A famous person who has appeared multiple times across different seasons is present in the show's history in a way that creates something like a character arc, a development of how the show understands them and how they have been integrated into Springfield's universe. Kelsey Grammer's Sideshow Bob is the most obvious case, and also the most obviously exceptional one, because Bob has been built into the show's mythology in a way that has made him something more than a guest character. But the serial presence of certain other recurring guest figures also creates a cumulative dimension. They develop a relationship to Springfield across their appearances, and the development is itself a piece of the show's history, a record of how Springfield has engaged with something from the outside world across time. The appearances of musician guests in episodes specifically about music contain some of the most careful technical material in the show's history. When the show deploys a musician in a context that involves them performing or discussing music, the musical material is real. The jazz discussions in episodes involving jazz musicians use real musical terminology and real musical references. The classical music episodes deploy actual classical repertoire with specific understanding of what they are using. The rock and pop episodes know what they are talking about in ways that fans of those musics recognize as accurate rather than approximated. This musical accuracy in guest appearances is one of the most consistent and most underappreciated achievements of the show's approach to its subject matter. It would have been easier, and essentially invisible to most of the audience, to use approximations, to have jazz musicians reference jazz in general terms without specific content, to have rock musicians perform something that sounds generically rock without being anything specific. The show's commitment to being specific instead of approximate in domains where most of the audience cannot check the accuracy is itself a statement about what kind of show it is. The guest appearances that are most embedded with private content are the ones where the famous person had a specific personal relationship to the episode's subject matter that most of the audience did not know about. An actor who had recently experienced a specific kind of loss appearing in an episode that handled that kind of loss, and whose performance carries the weight of personal experience even when the context is comedic. A musician who had a complicated history with a specific aspect of the music industry appearing in an episode that satirizes that aspect, and whose specific history is audible in the specific texture of what they bring to the satire. These appearances are the show at its most generous toward its guests, because they are the appearances that allow the guest to bring something real to the role, rather than asking them to perform a simplified version of their public persona. They require the writing staff to have known enough about the guest's actual situation to create a context where the real knowledge could land. And they produce appearances that have a dimension in addition to the comic or celebratory function, a dimension of genuine collaboration between the show's creative vision and the guest's specific human reality. The guest star appearances that failed, and there have been some across 36 seasons, are generally the ones where this specific dimension was absent, where the famous person was present but the episode did not know what to do with their specificity, where they were treated as a famous person in general rather than as this specific famous person with this specific quality. The appearances are diminished versions of what the best appearances achieve. They are still funny, often. They still serve their narrative function. But they lack the extra layer that the best appearances have, the layer that makes the episode more interesting to people who know who the guest actually is beyond their fame. The hidden content of the show's guest appearances is ultimately a record of what the show knew about the world outside Springfield. Every specific and accurate deployment of a guest's actual history and work is evidence of a writing staff that was paying attention to things beyond television, that cared about music and science and politics and literature in ways that left traces in the specific content of these appearances. Springfield may be isolated from the world, geographically and temporally, in the ways we have discussed, but the people who made it were not isolated, and the guests who came to Springfield brought the world with them, and the show received the world they brought with the kind of attention that leaves a mark. Section 10. The Homer and Marge Continuity. There is a marriage at the center of The Simpsons that has lasted 36 years, and it is the longest marriage in the history of American television. Not in terms of real time, though it is that too, in terms of the amount of story the show has told about it. Homer and Marge Simpson have been together longer, in the specific sense of having been the subject of more accumulated storytelling than any other couple in the history of the medium. Nearly 800 episodes, countless storylines. A marriage depicted from every angle across an extraordinary span of real time, with the same two characters, the same voices, the same fundamental dynamic, and an evolving understanding of what the marriage actually is that has been building across the show's entire history. Most discussions of the Homer and Marge marriage focus on its comedy, on the comic dynamic between Homer's chaos and Marge's management of that chaos, on the jokes that emerge from the specific contrast between who Homer is and who Marge is, and what it means that they chose each other and keep choosing each other across 36 years of storylines that test the choice in every way the show can imagine. The comedy is real and it has been consistently delivered. But underneath the comedy is something that the show has been quietly building across its entire history, something that is visible only to viewers who have been paying attention long enough to carry the accumulated context of who these two people are and what they have been through together. The Homer and Marge marriage is the show's most sustained piece of characterization, and the picture it has built over time is of a relationship more complex, more honest, and more specific than the comedy framework suggests. Begin with the fact of their difference. Homer and Marge are genuinely different people. Not different in the comedic sense of contrasting types placed in proximity for the sake of comedy, though the comedy comes from that contrast. Genuinely different in the sense that they experience the world through different emotional grammars, different primary concerns, different relationships to risk and stability, and social expectation and personal desire. They are not complementary opposites who fit together neatly. They are people whose differences create genuine friction as well as genuine attraction. Marge has needed, across 36 seasons, to find ways to live with someone who will never be reliably prudent, who will never stop generating situations that require management, who will never produce the stable and uncomplicated domestic life that some part of her appears to have wanted and that no version of Homer could ever provide. She has done this, with varying degrees of grace and varying expressions of frustration, across hundreds of episodes, and the way she has done it is not simple accommodation. It is something more complex, a continuous recalibration of what she needs, what she values, what the difference is between what she thought she wanted and what she has found herself actually loving about a life that contains Homer Simpson. The show has been honest about this recalibration across its history in ways that the comedy framework sometimes obscures. The episodes that deal directly with Marge's frustration with Homer's chaos are, if you watch them carefully, not episodes about a woman who has made a mistake choosing this man. They are episodes about a woman who has made a choice she continues to stand behind, while being completely clear-eyed about what the choice costs. The frustration is real. The love is also real. The two are not in contradiction. Homer's love for Marge is the show's most consistent and most seriously treated emotional fact. Across 36 seasons of stories in which Homer has been depicted as selfish, negligent, stupid, irresponsible, and prone to every variety of bad decision, his love for Marge has been depicted with a consistency and a seriousness that survives the comedy surrounding it. He loves her. This is not a conditional or complicated love. It is the love of someone for whom another person is the fundamental fact of their life, the orientation around which everything else is organized. The show has depicted this love in a variety of ways, some comic and some not. The comic versions are the most familiar. Homer doing spectacular and ridiculous things in the name of winning Marge back, Homer making grand romantic gestures with the specific incompetence he brings to everything, Homer being moved to genuine emotion by Marge's presence in ways that are played as funny because the frequency with which Homer achieves genuine emotional clarity is itself a surprise. These are the comic surface of a relationship the show takes seriously. The serious versions, the episodes that handle the Homer and Marge marriage without the comedy cushion, without the joke to land after the emotional moment, are the ones that reveal what the show actually understands about this relationship and why that understanding is worth 36 years of telling. There is an episode in the show's earlier seasons in which Homer and Marge are briefly separated, in which the circumstances that produced their original union are revisited, and the question of whether they should have ended up together is treated as a genuine question rather than a rhetorical one. The episode is funny because the show is funny, because the production does not know how to make an episode that is not funny. But underneath the comedy is a genuine engagement with what it means for these two specific people to be together, what each of them provides the other, that the other could not produce alone, and what the absence of that provision feels like from the inside. The answer the episode arrives at is not simple. It is not that they are perfect for each other, because they are demonstrably not perfect for each other in 1,000 specific ways that the show has documented across its history. It is that the imperfection is the point, or at least that the specific character of the imperfection is something that makes more sense than any alternative the episode can imagine. They are wrong for each other in the precise and specific way that still leaves them better off together than apart. The show knows this and has always known this, and the knowing is visible in every episode that tests the relationship and does not conclude that the test reveals a mistake. The show has also depicted the marriage aging in the specific emotional sense, even while the characters do not age in the physical sense. The dynamic between Homer and Marge in the show's earliest seasons is the dynamic of people who are still learning each other, still encountering the specific ways the other is different from what they expected, still surprised by the specific forms the other's love takes. The dynamic in later seasons is the dynamic of people who have been living inside each other's particular qualities for long enough that those qualities no longer require discovery. They know. This accumulated knowing is one of the most realistic things the show has depicted about long-term marriage, and it is also one of the hardest things to depict because the knowing is not dramatic. The drama is in discovery. The quiet of knowing is not dramatic in any conventional storytelling sense, and depicting it requires a commitment to the accumulation rather than to any individual moment of revelation. The Homer and Marge marriage has accumulated this quiet knowing across 36 years, and it is most visible in the background of episodes where the marriage is not the foreground subject. In those moments, in the specific small interactions between Homer and Marge that appear while the episode's foreground is about something else, the knowing is present. They know each other's rhythms. They know what the other's face means in this moment versus that moment. They know what the other needs and when and in what form, and the knowledge is easy in them in the way that long familiarity becomes easy. The comedy continues to come from the specific character of their difference. But beneath the comedy, the marriage is working in the quiet way that marriages that have decided to keep working actually work. The children of this marriage constitute one of the most interesting ongoing questions in the show's history, because the children are the evidence of what Homer and Marge made together, and what they made is more varied and more unexpected than either of them could have planned. Bart is Homer's child in certain ways. The chaos, the resistance to authority, the specific kind of social intelligence that operates through disruption rather than compliance. He is also Marge's child in ways that are less visible but equally real. The loyalty, the underlying sensitivity that the disruption exists to protect, the capacity for genuine feeling that the misbehavior covers. Bart is the synthesis of two people who should not have produced such a specific person but who did, and the specificity of who he is the most direct evidence of who they are together. Lisa is harder to account for, which is one of the show's most interesting ongoing mysteries. She is intelligent in a way that neither Homer nor Marge is intelligent. She is principled in a way that requires a certainty about what matters that neither parent has produced consistently. She arrived in this family, in this house, in this town, and found herself with a set of capacities and concerns that the environment cannot quite accommodate and that neither parent can quite reach. The show has handled this mystery with care. It does not explain Lisa's specificity. It does not reduce her to either parent's influence. It allows her to be what she is in a family where what she is does not quite fit. The most interesting dimension of the Homer and Marge marriage, in the context of everything we have discussed tonight, is what the marriage represents within the various frameworks the theories propose. If Springfield is a contamination zone, then Homer and Marge are two people who have been contaminated together, whose specific cognitive and physical alterations have developed in parallel across the same environment, and whose relationship has been built in and through and around those alterations in ways that make the relationship inseparable from the contamination. They are not the people they would have been in a different environment. The marriage is between the people the environment made them into. If everything is Homer's coma dream, then Marge is the most important person in that dream, the one the dream was made to hold. Homer's unconscious generated 36 years of Marge, with all her specificity and her intelligence, and her particular quality of patient attention, and her recurring frustrations, and her maintained love. The sheer detail of the Marge the dream contains is the measure of how important she is to the dreamer. You do not dream in that much detail about someone who is not the center of something. If the show is also about America, about the American family and American values, and the American relationship to time and consequence and collective memory, then Homer and Marge are the American marriage. The marriage that survives against the available evidence, that persists despite everything the environment throws at it, that chooses each other again at the end of every episode with a consistency that is both comic and, in the accumulated weight of 36 seasons, genuinely moving. They chose each other once before any of the episodes began, in a backstory that the show has told many times and differently each time, adjusting the era but maintaining the essential facts. They were young. They were in some kind of trouble. They found in each other something worth staying for, and they stayed. And 36 years of episodes later, they are still on the couch together, and the staying is still being chosen, and the choice is still the most important thing the show has to say about what these two people are. The marriage at the center of The Simpsons is the show's longest-running and most thoroughly developed artistic achievement. Not its funniest thing, or its most acclaimed thing, or its most analyzed thing, but its most sustained thing. The result of 36 years of returning to the same two people and asking what they are to each other now, and finding that the answer is always more than expected and always recognizably themselves. Whatever Springfield is, they are in it together. And that, in the end, is what the show has been saying all along. Not in any single episode, not in any revelation or resolution, but in the accumulated weight of all these stories about a family in a town that cannot quite be located on any map and that cannot quite be explained by any single theory, and that has been watched and loved and theorized about for 36 years by an audience that cannot quite let it go. The show is not a prediction. It is not a diagnosis, though it has diagnosed things. It is not a theory, though it has generated many. It is a show about a family, told with enough care and enough consistency and enough genuine love for its characters across enough time that it has become something more than what any individual description of it can contain. The background details are real. The music is carefully made. The characters have depths their episodes do not fully explore. The mysteries are genuinely mysterious. The marriage is genuinely a marriage. And Springfield is genuinely a place, in the way that fictional places become real through the accumulated weight of enough attention and enough story. You have been there tonight. And wherever you are now, settled in, and comfortable, and perhaps drifting toward sleep, you carry a little of it with you. A few more of the details embedded in the background. A little more of the music that has been scoring scenes for 3 decades. A little more of the accumulated history of people who never age, and a town that never quite arrives anywhere, and a show that never quite ends. Springfield is still there. It has always been there. The couch, the family, the television, the same street in the same town in no state in particular. The same opening notes, the same convergence, the same gag before the episode begins. And when you come back to it, whenever you come back to it, it will have been waiting. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Good night. A note on what we explored tonight. Across these 10 sections, we moved through roughly the full range of what careful attention to The Simpsons reveals when you give it the kind of time and quiet and unhurried looking that the show has always deserved. The background layer of Springfield, its signs and books and storefronts and the philosophy embedded in its prop design. The opening sequence as archive, 60 seconds of hidden content delivered at the beginning of every episode across 36 years. The secondary characters of Springfield, whose personal histories have been assembled in fragments across many episodes, distributed across the background of a show that has always been more interested in its world than any single episode's timeframe can accommodate. The treehouse of horror mythology, and the specific way the Halloween specials have functioned as a space where the show says what its regular format cannot quite say. The impossible geography of Springfield, and what the impossibility reveals about what kind of place a fictional setting actually is. The writers who put themselves in the show's walls, in names and places and musical choices, and the specific emotional intelligence of scenes that know things personally, the music that has been doing emotional work below the threshold of conscious attention for 3 decades. The storylines the show introduced and could not resolve without ending, carrying their open threads as the honest acknowledgement that some things in lives do not conclude. The guest appearances that were genuine engagements with the specific people who made them, rather than deployments of their fame. And the marriage at the show's center, the marriage between two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other across 36 years and nearly 800 episodes, the longest and most thoroughly depicted marriage in the history of the medium. None of this is separate from what makes The Simpsons funny, or affecting, or worth 36 years of attention. It is what makes all of those things possible. The care that went into the background details is the same care that went into the emotional climaxes of its best episodes. The musical intelligence that scored individual scenes is the same intelligence that chose what music meant in the show's world. The commitment to the secondary characters' inner lives is the same commitment that made the primary characters worth knowing. Springfield is a place made with extraordinary care for an audience that mostly watches it at the surface. And the surface is worth watching. But the depths, the real depths of what this show has put into the world across the time it has existed, are worth the long, quiet evening of attention we have given them tonight. Rest well. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always is. Section 6 Expansion. The writers hiding in plain sight continued. The writers' room of The Simpsons across its history has been an unusual place in the landscape of American television, and the unusualness has left specific marks on the show that are visible to viewers who know where to look. The Harvard connection is the most discussed and most simplified version of a real phenomenon. The show has historically employed writers with elite educational backgrounds in higher proportions than most comparable television comedies, and this has produced a writing staff with specific intellectual preoccupations, specific frames of reference, and specific anxieties about the relationship between intelligence and usefulness in the real world that have found their way into the show's content in various forms. But the Harvard simplification misses most of what is actually interesting about the intellectual character of the show's writing across its history. The show has always been interested in intelligence as a subject, not because its writers were intelligent, but because intelligence in the context of Springfield is consistently shown to be insufficient as a tool for navigating the specific challenges Springfield produces. Lisa is more intelligent than anyone else in the Simpson family and in most of Springfield, and this intelligence does not make her life easier or her situation better. It makes her life harder and her isolation deeper. The show's writers, whatever their educational backgrounds, understood something about this dynamic that they encoded in the most intelligent character in the show's main cast. The more interesting intellectual influence on the show's content is the range of non-comedic interests that specific writers brought to the writers' room and that found their way into episodes that had no formal obligation to engage with those interests. A writer who is seriously interested in science brought specific scientific accuracy to the episodes that touched on scientific content. A writer with a serious interest in literature brought specific literary knowledge to the episodes that deployed literary references. A writer with a genuine commitment to social criticism brought a quality of specific and accurate observation to the episodes that engaged with American political and social life. The result is a show that is dense with accurate information in domains that comedies are not typically required to get right. The scientific content of the show's science episodes is real. The musical references in the show's music episodes are specific and accurate. The historical content in the show's historical episodes is more carefully researched than the casual deployment suggests. This accuracy is not necessary for the comedy to work, but it is there, and it is the evidence of a writing staff that brought their specific knowledge to the work, rather than settling for the approximations that would have served the immediate comic purpose equally well. The writers' personal relationships have found their way into the show in various forms across its history. The specific dynamic between certain writing staff members, the complementary and sometimes conflicting approaches to what the show should be and how it should handle specific kinds of material, is visible in the specific character of different episodes and different seasons. A season produced during a period of relative harmony in the writer's room has a different quality from a season produced during a period of creative disagreement. The disagreements leave traces in the work, sometimes as the productive tension between different approaches finding resolution in material that is stronger for having been contested, and sometimes as the less productive kind of friction that produces material that feels pulled in different directions. The show has also given specific writers the opportunity to address specific personal material through the frame of the Simpson family's experience, and the most careful of these moments are the most specifically emotionally accurate moments in the show's history. The episodes that handle loss most directly, that deal with grief in the way that grief actually presents in the experience of people who are inside it, are the episodes produced by writers who were dealing with loss personally. The episodes that understand failure most precisely, that know what it feels like from the inside to have organized yourself around an expectation and found the expectation disappointed, are the episodes produced by writers for whom this was a live experience rather than an observed one. The show has also embedded long-running private conversations between its creators in the content of episodes that appear to the general audience to be about entirely different things. Two writers with an ongoing disagreement about a specific aspect of storytelling or character or the nature of comedy will have episodes that are publicly about Springfield and privately about the disagreement, using Homer or Lisa or Bart as proxies for positions they have been arguing about in the room. These embedded debates are generally invisible to viewers who do not know they are happening, but they have shaped episodes in ways that are visible in retrospect to anyone who has both read the available accounts of the writer's room dynamics and watched the episodes produced during the same period. The show has always been, in this sense, a conversation between its makers that uses Springfield as its medium. The audience overhears the conversation but only hears the Springfield version. The actual conversation is in there, encoded in the choices the show makes, in what it decides to care about in any given episode, in what it finds funny and what it finds serious, and what it finds worth the specific attention it brings to the material it handles with the most care. The departures from the show across its history have left specific absences that longtime viewers can feel, even when they cannot identify their cause. When a writer or producer who had been central to the show's character left, the show's character changed in ways that are difficult to precisely describe, but easy to register for someone who has been watching long enough to carry a sense of what the show is supposed to feel like. The texture of the humor shifts slightly. The specific quality of the emotional moments changes. The kinds of things the show decides to care about in a given season are different from the things it cared about in the preceding one. These changes are partly the natural evolution of a creative enterprise across time, and partly the specific losses and additions that come with any change in the creative team responsible for a long-running work. The show has absorbed many such changes across 36 years and has maintained enough consistency to remain recognizable as itself through all of them. But the changes are there, and the specific quality of any given season reflects the specific people who made it in ways that extend beyond the content of the episodes themselves into the quality of attention and care and personality that those people brought to the work of making them. The most consistent thread across all these different writers' rooms across all these different seasons is the commitment to taking the Simpson family seriously as characters, rather than simply as vehicles for comedy. This commitment has been more or less explicit in different periods of the show's history, more visible in some seasons than others, but it has never been fully absent, and its presence is the foundation on which everything else the show has achieved is built. Without that commitment, the background details would not exist. Without it, the music would not be as carefully scored. Without it, the secondary characters would not have inner lives. Without it, the marriage at the show's center would not be a marriage in any real sense. The commitment to these characters as people, rather than as comic types, is what makes everything else possible, and it is the most consistent and most foundational thing the people who made the show brought to it across 36 years of making it. Section 7. Expansion. The music mysteries continued. The relationship between sound and emotion in The Simpsons extends beyond what the scoring provides into what the show does with sound more broadly, and the broader sound design of Springfield is one of the least discussed and most carefully produced aspects of the show's sensibility. Springfield has a sonic identity. The town sounds like something specific. The ambient sound of its streets, the background audio of its institutions, the specific quality of how sound behaves in Moe's Tavern versus how it behaves in the nuclear power plant versus how it behaves in the Simpson house. These differences are consistent across the show's history, and they are the result of deliberate sound design rather than any technical accident. The sound of the nuclear power plant is among the most carefully constructed sonic environments in the show's history. The plant has a continuous ambient sound that is present in every scene set inside it, a low-frequency rumble and hiss that is audible below the level of dialogue and scoring, a sound that suggests the physical proximity of enormous industrial processes. This ambient sound has been a fixture of the plant's sonic identity across the show's entire run, and it is one of the most consistent elements of any location in Springfield. The plant sounds the same in Episode 1 as it sounds in Episode 700, and the sameness is the result of a maintained sonic template that someone cared enough about to preserve across decades of production. The sound of the Simpson living room is the counterpoint to the plant's industrial ambience, domestic, slightly warmer in its acoustic properties, reflecting the specific reverb characteristics of a mid-sized American living room in a house of the Simpson house's general dimensions and construction. This domestic acoustic is what the show uses to signal home, and the signal is consistent enough that the audience has been receiving it as a conditioned response across many years of watching. When you hear the Simpson living room's specific ambient sound, something in your attention settles in a way that corresponds to the emotional meaning of home within the show's universe. Moe's Tavern has a sonic texture that is specific to bars of its particular character. A low-grade ambient noise of glasses and indistinct conversation, and the specific quality of a wooden floor in a space that has absorbed years of beer and bad decisions. The ambient noise of Moe's has been consistent across the show's history in ways that create a sense of the bar as a persistent place, rather than as a set that is assembled and reassembled for each scene. You can hear that Moe's has been open for a long time. The voices of the show's characters are themselves a form of sound design in the most fundamental sense, because the voice performers have maintained their characters across decades in ways that are technically remarkable without being technically audible as remarkable. Dan Castellaneta has been Homer for 36 years. Julie Kavner has been Marge for 36 years. Nancy Cartwright has been Bart for 36 years. Yeardley Smith has been Lisa for 36 years. These performances have evolved across the decades in ways that track with the show's changing understanding of each character, while maintaining the fundamental sonic identity that makes each voice instantly recognizable. The specific vocal quality of each character is not simply a chosen performance register. It is the accumulated result of thousands of hours of voice work with a character of understanding the character deeply enough to know what their voice does in every emotional situation the show places them in, of maintaining that knowledge and that vocal instrument across the full span of the show's history. The voice of Homer in the first season and the voice of Homer in the most recent season are recognizably the same voice, but the performance behind the voice is more complete, more deeply understood, more precisely calibrated to the character's full range in the most recent version. The musical guest appearances mentioned in the main section of this text deserve specific attention for what they reveal about how the show understood the relationship between music and cultural meaning. The show has never used music carelessly. When it deploys a specific piece of music in a specific scene, the choice is always deliberate, always connected to what the music means beyond its basic sonic properties. The use of American folk and country music in the show's treatment of its own history, in the flashback episodes that deal with Springfield's origins and the Simpson family's history within it, creates a sonic frame for the past that associates that past with a specific American musical tradition. Country and folk music carry associations with rural life, with working-class experience, with a version of American identity that is grounded in specific geographic and cultural contexts. When the show uses these forms to frame its own historical material, it is making a claim about what kind of American experience Springfield's history belongs to. The use of classical music in the show's more elevated comic contexts is similarly deliberate. When the show places specific classical pieces in contexts of pretension or social aspiration, it is using the cultural associations of classical music to do comic work that the music itself did not originally intend. The humor comes from the gap between the cultural prestige the music carries and the specific context in which it is being deployed. But this humor requires the audience to carry some awareness of the cultural prestige in question, which means the show is both making the joke and, for viewers who do not already have the awareness, potentially creating it. The folk songs that appear in specific Springfield community contexts, the songs that the town sings together in moments of civic unity or celebration, are another category that rewards specific attention. The show invented a body of Springfield-specific folk music across its history, songs that belong to the town's imagined oral tradition, and some of this invented folk music is better than its fictional context requires it to be. A song written for a single episode, to be sung by characters in a specific scene, with a melody and lyrics that work in that context, and are then released into Springfield's folk archive, represents the same commitment to doing things right that characterizes the show's best background details. The scoring of the Treehouse of Horror episodes represents a specific subgenre within the show's musical history that has its own conventions and its own history of development. The horror scoring of the Halloween specials draws from the history of horror film music in ways that are specific and knowing. Specific orchestral textures associated with specific horror film traditions, specific rhythmic patterns that create specific kinds of suspense, specific harmonic languages that signal the supernatural or the threatening in the vocabulary that horror music has developed across decades of film scoring. But the horror scoring of The Simpsons always maintains a relationship to the show's regular musical identity that prevents the horror elements from completely overcoming the Springfieldness of the sonic environment. The Halloween music sounds like horror music and like Simpsons music simultaneously, which is a specific and difficult balance to achieve, and that the show has maintained consistently across its decades of Halloween specials. The transition music that moves between scenes within episodes is one of the most overlooked aspects of the show's musical texture. These brief transitional pieces, sometimes only a few seconds in duration, carry the sonic burden of moving the viewer from one emotional or narrative context to another without creating jarring discontinuity. The skill required to write transition music that serves this function invisibly, that does its work without calling attention to itself, is genuine compositional skill, and the show has produced thousands of these transitions across its history, each one a small and generally unremarked piece of functional music. The songs written specifically for episodes are one of the show's most distinctive features and one of its most consistently high-quality achievements. The Simpsons has been writing original songs for specific episodes since its earliest seasons, and the body of original music produced for the show across its history is substantial and remarkably varied. From O Streetcar in the episode where Marge pursues her passion for musical theater, to the songs that appear in the various musical episodes, to the community songs and the character songs, and the satirical pieces about specific cultural phenomena. The show has been producing original music with genuine craft and genuine humor across its entire run. The best of these songs work not only in their original context, but as pieces of music that retain their character outside that context, that carry enough specific identity to be recognizable and meaningful when encountered on their own. This is a higher standard than the functional requirement of the episode that produced them, which only requires that the song work in its scene. The songs that achieve this higher standard are the ones that listeners carry with them out of the episode, that come back to them at unexpected moments, that have become part of their personal musical archive in the way that real music does. Section 8 Expansion. The unresolved storylines continued. The history of Springfield itself is one of the show's most consistently introduced and most persistently unresolved narrative threads. And it is worth spending specific time with because the town's history is not simply background texture, but an active element of what Springfield is in the present. Springfield was founded in the 18th century, and the show has established various facts about this founding across multiple episodes without assembling those facts into a coherent and consistent historical narrative. The founding father of Springfield is a figure whose history has been depicted in different episodes in ways that are not always consistent with each other, but whose essential character has remained stable. An expedient man? A man whose founding of Springfield was motivated by practical considerations rather than idealistic ones? A man who arrived in this specific place for reasons that had more to do with what he was running from than with what he was building toward. This founding story, assembled from fragments across many episodes, is a history of Springfield that the town itself has largely forgotten or suppressed in favor of a more flattering version. The official narrative of Springfield's founding, the version that appears in the town's self-representation, is heroic in the ways that founding narratives are conventionally heroic. The version that the show has actually assembled in the background is considerably less flattering and considerably more honest about what the founding of places like Springfield actually looks like in the historical record. The town's indigenous history is present only as an absence in the show's content. The land on which Springfield sits was occupied before its current occupants arrived, and this fact is acknowledged in the occasional presence of Native American characters in the show's background and in certain historical episodes that touch on the town's pre-founding period, but it is never addressed with the sustained attention that the founding narrative receives. This absence is itself a form of information about what Springfield has chosen to remember and what it has chosen not to. The industrial history of Springfield, the specific sequence of economic activities that produce the town's current character, is visible in the town's physical landscape and in the histories of its oldest institutions. Springfield has been a manufacturing town and a mining town and an agricultural town at various points in its history before becoming the town it is now, dominated by the nuclear power plant and its satellite economy. The traces of these earlier economic phases are visible in the town's older buildings, in the specific configuration of its commercial districts, in the particular combination of prosperity and decay that gives Springfield its characteristic visual texture. The power plant's history within Springfield is one of the show's richest historical threads and one of its most consistently relevant to the present action. Burns built the plant in circumstances the show has depicted in various episodes, and the building of the plant transformed Springfield in ways that the current Springfield is still living inside. The economic dependence on the plant, the physical alteration of the environment, the specific social organization of a town built around a single major employer, all of these are the legacy of a historical decision that the current residents did not make and cannot undo. The characters whose histories extend deepest into Springfield's past are the most interesting sources of information about what Springfield has been across its history and how the present relates to that history. Burns's history extends the furthest, and his relationship to the town's past is both the most extensive and the most fraught, because he is simultaneously the person with the deepest knowledge of Springfield's history and the person most responsible for the parts of that history that Springfield would prefer not to acknowledge. The history of the Bouvier family, Marge's family, is another thread the show has introduced without fully developing. The Bouvier sisters arrived in Springfield at some point in the family's history, and the show has referenced the family's specific history in various flashback episodes without building a complete picture of where the family came from, what brought them to Springfield, and what the specific character of their family inheritance has been. Patty and Selma carry something from their family history that shapes who they are in the present, and the shaping is visible in their characters across many episodes, but the history that produced the shaping has been only partially depicted. The history of the Simpson family before Abe is another area where the show has established enough to suggest a richer history than it has depicted. The Simpson name has been in Springfield for multiple generations, and the relationship between the Simpsons and the Burns family across that history, the pattern of employment and dependency and exploitation that has characterized the relationship in the present, appears to have earlier antecedents that the show has touched on without fully exploring. The school's history is one of the show's most interesting ongoing historical threads, because the school is the institution most directly involved in the formation of the town's next generation, and the school's history is a record of the specific ways that Springfield has attempted and failed to invest in that formation across its history. The school has been consistently underfunded across the show's history, and the underfunding is not accidental or recent. It is the result of decades of civic decisions about what to prioritize, decisions that have consistently prioritized other things over the school, and that have left the school in the condition of managed inadequacy that the show has depicted across its run. The history of the town's civic institutions more broadly, the library and the hospital and the police department and the fire department and the courts, is a history of modest resources and inconsistent investment, of civic functions that are performed with the limited means available after other priorities have been addressed, of a community that has organized its collective resources around things that are not civic institutions. This history is visible in the specific state of these institutions throughout the show, in the particular quality of their inadequacy, and it is the result of historical patterns of decision-making that the present town has inherited without much apparent awareness of the inheritance. The most unresolved historical thread of all is the question of what Springfield will become, which is a question the show cannot answer without ending its present, but which the show has visited in enough flash-forward episodes to establish that what Springfield becomes is both recognizably itself and significantly different from what it is now. The flash-forward Springfield is a place where the consequences of the present have arrived, where the things the show has been building toward for 36 seasons have reached their logical destinations, where the characters the show has been depicting as frozen in amber have continued to develop in the directions that their established characters suggest. These glimpses of future Springfield are among the show's most emotionally affecting material, precisely because they are glimpses into a world where time has been allowed to do what the regular show prevents it from doing. Characters have grown up, relationships have evolved, the town has changed in ways that reflect both the continuity of what it has always been and the specific alterations that time and consequence produce. Future Springfield is Springfield with its unresolved threads resolved, and the resolutions are, consistently, more complicated and more honest than any single episode's capacity to imagine them. The show cannot live in that future. It must return to the present, to the frozen present of the floating timeline, after every visit. But the visits are the show's acknowledgement that the unresolved threads are not simply unresolved by accident or convenience. They are unresolved because resolution is what lies beyond the boundary the show cannot cross, because the answers to the unresolved questions are in a future that requires the show to end before it can arrive. Section 9 Expansion. The guest star Easter eggs continued. The category of guest appearances most likely to contain deeply embedded content that most viewers miss entirely is the category of appearances by people who were not famous in the conventional entertainment sense. Scientists, writers, activists, public intellectuals whose work was sufficiently specific and sufficiently important that their presence in Springfield carried information that was invisible to anyone who had not encountered that work. Stephen Jay Gould appeared in an episode as himself, in the context of the show's engagement with evolutionary science, and the episode's handling of the material he brought to it was specific in ways that reflected a genuine knowledge of his work and his position in the ongoing public conversations about science in America. Gould was not simply a famous scientist, which would have been sufficient for most guest appearance purposes. He was a scientist with a specific set of preoccupations and a specific way of thinking about science's relationship to culture and politics and the history of ideas, and the episode that included him was doing something with those specific preoccupations rather than simply deploying his prestige. The appearances of figures from American cultural history, people who represented specific and significant aspects of that history, were similarly handled with the specific knowledge of what those people represented rather than with the general knowledge of their fame. A figure from the civil rights movement appearing in an episode that touched on race and American history was not simply a famous guest. The choice of that specific figure for that specific episode required a knowledge of what that figure meant within the history being depicted, what their specific contribution to that history was, and how their presence in Springfield's encounter with that history added something that any other famous figure would not have added. The cross-period guest appearances, figures from different generations of American cultural history appearing in episodes that place them in contact with Springfield's present, are another category of rich embedded content. The show has occasionally placed historical figures, both real and invented, in contact with contemporary Springfield in ways that use the encounter to say something about what American culture has inherited from its various historical moments. The inherited things are sometimes admirable and sometimes not, and the show has been willing to use the encounter between historical prestige and Springfield's present reality to complicate both. The international guest stars, artists, and figures from outside American culture, whose appearances in Springfield brought a perspective on American life that is specifically foreign and specifically informed, are one of the most consistently underexplored categories of guest appearance in the show's history. A guest from outside the American cultural context, encountering Springfield with the perspective of someone who has observed American life from outside, offers something different from what an American guest offers. The specific clarity of seeing a thing from a sufficient distance to see its characteristic shape. The show has used this perspective in various episodes with varying degrees of explicitness, sometimes making the foreign perspective the explicit subject of the encounter, and sometimes allowing it to operate more quietly in the texture of what the guest brings to their scenes. The quieter uses are generally the more interesting ones, because the foreign perspective is most revealing when it is not announced but is simply present in the specific choices the guest makes in their scenes, in what they find surprising or amusing or troubling about Springfield that the residents find entirely unremarkable. The child guest stars are a separate and interesting category that the show has handled with specific care. Children appearing in Springfield episodes, either as versions of real child entertainers or as characters they played in other contexts, brought a specific energy to their interactions with the Simpson children that is different from what adult guest stars bring. The Simpson children's relationship to these guests carries the specific quality of childhood social dynamics, the specific anxieties and fascinations that children bring to encounters with peers who are, in some sense, more accomplished or more visible than they are, and the show's handling of these dynamics has been consistently more psychologically specific than the general guest appearance framework requires. The pattern of guest appearances across seasons reveals something about the show's relationship to contemporary culture in each period. The guests of any given season reflect what was culturally prominent in that moment, what the writers were paying attention to outside the show, what they found worth bringing into Springfield. A season whose guest roster includes a specific concentration of musicians reflects a period when the writers were particularly engaged with music. A season whose guests are predominantly from the worlds of politics and social commentary reflects a period of particular engagement with those concerns. This pattern makes the guest roster of any given season a kind of index of the show's cultural preoccupations at that moment, a record of what the people making it found most interesting in the world outside Springfield. And the aggregate of these season-by-season indexes, assembled across 36 seasons, is a record of what the show has found most interesting in American cultural life across the span of its existence. A different and specific way of reading the history of the show's relationship to the culture that produced it. Section 10. Expansion. The Homer and Marge continuity continued. The specific episodes in the Homer and Marge relationship that most clearly reveal what the show understands about long-term marriage are the ones that are not explicitly about the marriage at all. The episodes that take the marriage as a given, as the stable ground against which other stories play out, are the ones that reveal its actual character most clearly because they allow the marriage to simply be what it is without the pressure of having to justify or explain itself. In these episodes, the specific quality of Homer and Marge's interaction has a different texture from the episodes that foreground their relationship. The interactions are more casual, more precisely calibrated to the specific rhythms of people who know each other completely. The jokes they make to each other carry references that are not explained because they don't need to be explained, shared history that is assumed rather than demonstrated. The fights, when they appear, have the specific character of fights between people who know each other's sore spots and who sometimes cannot resist pressing them. And the recovery from those fights has the practiced quality of people who have been recovering from this kind of fight for a long time and know how to do it without the recovery needing to be performed for anyone's benefit. This is the most realistic portrait of long-term marriage that American television has produced, and it is remarkable that it is present in a cartoon comedy rather than in the prestige drama that typically gets credit for sophisticated emotional portraiture. The realism is not in any single episode but in the accumulated texture of 36 years of depicting the same two people in the same relationship across hundreds of episodes and storylines. The specific ways that Homer fails Marge, across the show's history, are consistent in a way that reveals their origin in character rather than in plot convenience. Homer fails Marge in the ways that someone of his particular combination of qualities would consistently fail, through inattention rather than malice, through the specific kind of cognitive overloading that makes him lose track of things he genuinely cares about, through the characteristic pattern of pursuing immediate gratification in ways that create costs he has not calculated. These failures are fully Homer's failures. They emerge from who he specifically is rather than from what the plot requires of him in any given episode. And Marge's responses to these failures are equally specific to who she is. She does not respond with simple anger, which would be more dramatically efficient but less true to the character the show has built. She responds with the specific mixture of frustration and sadness, and continuing commitment that characterizes someone who loves a person whose qualities produce both the love and the frustration, who cannot separate the things that make Homer impossible from the things that make Homer worth the impossibility. This response has been consistently her response across the show's history, and its consistency is itself a portrait. The portrait of a woman who has understood something about her situation clearly enough to have organized herself around it, who has accepted the specific terms of what she has and found the acceptance sustainable. The moments when Marge is happiest in the show's history are worth examining specifically because happiness is the state that most directly reveals what someone most needs. Marge's moments of genuine happiness are not the moments when Homer does the romantic or dramatic thing, though she receives those with warmth. They are the quieter moments, the moments when Homer shows, without being prompted and without being dramatic about it, that he has been paying attention to her, that he knows what she is thinking about, that the specific interior life she carries, the worries and the hopes and the ongoing concerns that most of Homer's foreground activity crowds out, has been received by someone who loves her. Homer achieves this occasionally. The show has been honest about the occasionality, which is the realistic frequency at which people who love each other manage to fully see the other person in the midst of their own particular noise. And the moments when Homer manages it are the moments when the marriage is most visible in its essential character. Two people who chose each other and whose choice is validated, periodically, by specific instances of being seen. The show's treatment of the Homer and Marge marriage across the children's lives is another of its most carefully maintained continuities. The parents' relationship to each of their children is specific and consistent, and the specific character of each parent-child relationship reflects both who the parent is and who the child is in ways that are psychologically accurate rather than comic convenient. Homer's relationship to Bart is the most overtly complex and most overtly troubled of his parental relationships. The strangulation gag, which appears across many episodes as a reflexive response to Bart's provocations, is funny as a recurring gag, and is also looked at carefully over the course of the show's history, a portrait of a father-son relationship organized around a specific kind of mutual frustration that contains enormous amounts of affection underneath the frustration. Homer strangling Bart is Homer's inability to hold the combination of love and exasperation that Bart produces in any more sophisticated way. It is not abuse. It is incompetence. Specifically, the incompetence of someone who loves someone and keeps finding that the love does not translate into effective parenting. Homer's relationship to Lisa is the show's most consistently rendered portrait of love that cannot quite cross the gap of comprehension. Homer loves Lisa. This has never been in question across the show's history. But Homer cannot fully understand Lisa, and the inability to understand her does not make his love for her any less real. It makes it more poignant, because love that cannot understand its object must find other forms of expression. Homer expresses his love for Lisa through the specific forms available to him, through presence, through effort, through the occasional and always imperfect attempt to enter her world even when her world is beyond his capacity to fully inhabit. The episodes that deal with Homer and Lisa's relationship at its most direct, the episodes where the gap between them is the explicit subject and where both the love and the incomprehension are in play simultaneously, are among the show's most emotionally accurate treatments of the specific kind of love that exists between parents and children who are genuinely different people in ways that the parent cannot bridge but does not stop trying to bridge. Marge's relationship to each child is shaped by the specific kind of attention she brings to her parenting, which is the same patient and precise attention she brings to everything in her domain. She sees each child specifically. She knows their specific needs and their specific fears and their specific ways of processing difficulty, and she responds to those specifics rather than to a generalized idea of what each child requires. This seeing is the most important thing she provides her children, and the show has depicted it consistently enough to make it one of the most reliable emotional facts in Springfield's universe. The marriage as a whole, across 36 years, is the show's most sustained argument for something that American culture generally treats as a cliché, but that the show has rendered as a genuine and specific truth. That the people we choose to build our lives with are not simply the people who make us happiest in the simplest sense, but the people whose specific qualities create a life that is more interesting, more difficult, more demanding, and more worth having than the life we would make alone. Homer and Marge make each other's lives harder and more interesting simultaneously, and the show has been honest about both dimensions for 36 years without resolving the tension between them, because the tension is the marriage. That is what the show has been saying, in the background and in the music and in the unresolved threads and in the voices maintained across decades and in the streets named after Portland geography and in the signs placed in 4-second shots for the one viewer who would pause and read them. 36 years of saying it. Every episode and installment in the longest continuous love story American television has ever told. And the story is still going. Supplemental. The deep continuity of Springfield. There is a kind of detail that the most devoted watchers of any long-running show eventually begin to track. The detail that exists not within any single episode but between episodes, in the space of connection and continuity that accumulates across a show's history as patterns that no individual episode establishes, but that the full body of work reveals when examined as a continuous whole. The Simpsons has been producing this kind of between-episode continuity since the show's earliest seasons, and across 36 years, it has accumulated an architecture of connection that is one of the most elaborate in the history of American television. Not because any individual piece of it is remarkable, but because the density of the connections, the number of times the show reaches back across its own history to acknowledge something established in a previous season or a previous episode, creates a sense of Springfield as a place with genuine depth and genuine memory. A place that existed before any given episode began and will continue after it ends. The most consistent form of this between-episode continuity is the callback. the moment in a later episode when the show references something established in an earlier one, drawing the viewer into the pleasure of recognition while also adding a dimension to what is happening in the present. The Simpsons has been doing callbacks since its second season, and the accumulated archive of callbacks across its history is a kind of hyperlinked text, a network of references and connections that the show has been weaving for 3.5 decades. Some of these callbacks are explicit, acknowledged in the dialogue or the scene construction in ways that make the reference unmistakable even to viewers who have not seen the original episode. These are the callbacks that generate the specific pleasure of recognition in the widest audience, the pleasure available to anyone who has been watching the show for any substantial period. But the most interesting callbacks are the ones that are not explicit, that exist in a space between reference and coincidence, that are detectable by the viewer who carries enough of the show's history to notice the connection, but that do not announce themselves to anyone else. A specific piece of background dressing that appeared in an early episode reappearing in a much later one. A line of dialogue that echoes something said in a different season in a different context. A character making a choice that is consistent with a choice they made years earlier in an episode that most of the current audience would not remember. These quiet callbacks are the show's private conversation with its most devoted viewers, conducted in the background of episodes that are publicly about something else. They require no special explanation or acknowledgement. They simply land differently for the viewer who holds enough of the show's history to catch them and pass unremarked for everyone else. The show has been having this private conversation for 36 years, and the conversation has been accumulating depth and richness across all that time. The Homer falling down the stairs motif is one of the show's most persistent visual callbacks, appearing in different configurations across many seasons as a recurring element that has been familiar to longtime viewers for so long that its appearance now carries the accumulated weight of all its previous appearances. The first time Homer fell down the stairs, it was a physical joke. The 20th time, it was the same physical joke plus the weight of all those previous times. The recognition not just of the joke but of the joke's long history. The 100th time, the joke and its history have become inseparable. The continuity of the recurring element itself is part of what is being communicated. This principle of continuity adding weight to recurring elements is one of the show's most distinctive qualities as a long-running work. Things that began as jokes have, across the span of decades, accumulated emotional dimensions that the original joke did not contain. Homer's eating, which began as a character trait deployed for comic purposes, has across 36 years become a complex portrait of a specific kind of consolation-seeking, of a relationship to immediate physical satisfaction that is the counterpart to a larger life of deferred gratification and constant disappointment. The eating is still funny, but it is funny in a way that now contains all the sadness that an accurate understanding of why Homer eats brings to the comedy. The evolution of Bart's relationship to authority is another example of this accumulated complexity. In the earliest seasons, Bart's resistance to authority was primarily a comic trait, the mischievous kid whose refusal to be managed was the reliable engine of a specific kind of humor. Across many seasons, the same resistance has been shown in contexts that reveal its origin and its costs, that make clear that Bart's relationship to authority is not simply a personality trait chosen for comic effect, but is rooted in something real about his experience and his self-understanding. The comedy of Bart's resistance is still present in the show's most recent seasons. But the comedy now contains a history that makes it more complex than any single episode's presentation of it suggests. The specific way that Springfield's collective memory works, or fails to work, is one of the show's most consistent thematic continuities and one of the most carefully maintained. Springfield forgets things. This is the show's most basic narrative reset mechanism and its most consistent statement about what kind of community Springfield is. But the forgetting is not total. Traces remain. The things Springfield forgets are not gone but suppressed, available to be recovered by someone who looks carefully enough and who is willing to press against the community's preferred version of its own history. The characters who do this pressing consistently, who maintain access to what Springfield would prefer to forget, are the characters who occupy the most uncomfortable positions in the show's social landscape. Lisa, who remembers and who insists on the significance of what she remembers, is the most isolated member of the Simpson family, precisely because her refusal to participate in the collective forgetting makes her incomprehensible to most of the community around her. Sideshow Bob, in the specific episodes where his intelligence is most clearly in play, has access to historical information that Springfield would prefer remained inaccessible, and his access to this information is part of what makes him threatening rather than simply comical. Even Homer, in his occasional moments of clarity, touches the edges of things that Springfield has organized itself to not see, and the show has been careful to show the specific discomfort that these moments of clarity produce for him. The continuity of Springfield's collective forgetting across the show's history is itself a form of deep continuity, because the things Springfield chooses to forget are consistent across the show's run. The environmental contamination is always the thing Springfield is not looking at directly. Burns's specific history with the community is always the thing the community does not examine. The specific inequality of resources and opportunity within Springfield is always the thing that the community's cheerful self-presentation is organized to not address. These consistent blind spots are not accidents of episodic storytelling. They are the show's maintained portrait of a community's relationship to its own uncomfortable truths. The relationship between Springfield and the American culture it reflects has its own form of deep continuity that runs beneath the individual episode's satirical targets. The show began by targeting specific aspects of American life that were relevant in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The specific economic anxieties of the working class, the specific failings of American institutions in their late 20th century forms, the specific social contract of American family life in a period when that contract was under visible strain. These targets have evolved across the show's history as American life has evolved, and the specific objects of the satire in recent seasons are not the same objects that the earliest seasons targeted. But the structure of the satire has been consistent. The show has always been satirizing the gap between what America says about itself and what America actually does, between the values America claims to hold and the specific ways those values are compromised in practice. The specific content of this gap has changed across 36 years. The structure of the gap, the basic shape of the hypocrisy the show is pointing at, has been consistent from the beginning. This structural consistency is what allows the show to remain legible as satire across a period of such significant cultural change. The satirical target has moved, but the satirical form has remained stable, and the form is what the audience carries with them from one decade to the next. The show trained its audience to recognize a specific kind of hypocrisy, to see the gap between the stated value and the actual practice, and the training has remained useful across 36 years because the gap itself has not gone away. It has simply moved to different locations. The deepest continuity of the show is the continuity of its basic emotional intelligence, which has been consistent since the earliest seasons and which is the thing that makes it still worth watching across 36 years. The show knows something specific and true about the experience of being in a family, about the specific combination of love and frustration and obligation and loyalty that family membership produces, and it has been expressing that specific knowledge in every episode it has made across the full span of its history. This knowledge is not reducible to any formula or technique. It is the product of a sustained commitment across many different creative teams across many different seasons, to taking the experience of family seriously as a subject, to finding in the specific chaos and warmth and petty tragedy and genuine comedy of domestic life something worth depicting with care, to believing that the family on the couch at 5:15 on a Sunday afternoon, imperfect and stuck and loving each other with the specific love that people develop for the other people they are permanently stuck with, is worth 36 years of attention and craft and deliberate, unhurried, careful storytelling. That is the deepest continuity. That is what has been present from the beginning, and that will be there in the last episode, whenever the last episode comes. A family in a house in a town, and the town is everywhere, and the house is the only place they have ever really lived, and the family is the whole thing. Supplemental. The specific pleasures of the long watch. There is something that happens to a viewer who has been watching The Simpsons for a very long time. Something that happens gradually and that is difficult to identify from inside the experience of it. The show becomes at some point less a thing you watch and more a place you visit, a space whose dimensions are thoroughly familiar and whose specific textures you know in a way that does not require active attention to maintain. This is the state the longtime viewer occupies, and it is worth describing because it is the state from which the details discussed throughout this script are most accessible. The viewer who knows Springfield this well does not need to be paying conscious attention to notice when something in the background has changed, or when a musical phrase is doing something specific, or when a character's behavior is in conversation with something they did in a much earlier episode. The familiarity is stored in something deeper than attention, in the part of the viewer's experience of the show that has accumulated over years of watching. The specific pleasure this produces is unlike most of the pleasures available to first-time viewers or occasional viewers. It is not the pleasure of discovery, which the occasional viewer is experiencing each time they encounter material that is new to them. It is the pleasure of recognition, the specific warmth of encountering something familiar, of seeing that the thing you remembered is still there and still the thing you remembered it being, of finding that your accumulated knowledge of the place has not been invalidated by the passage of time. This pleasure has a quality that is worth naming. It is the pleasure of continuity. The pleasure of finding that your relationship to a thing has survived, that the time you have invested in it has not been wasted or invalidated, that the familiarity you have built is still an accurate guide to what the thing is. For viewers who have been watching The Simpsons since the beginning, or since any early point in its history, this continuity has been available for a period that now spans multiple decades of their actual lives. The show has been a fixture across periods of significant personal change, and its consistency across those changes is itself a form of comfort. The show, in other words, provides the same thing to its longtime viewers that it provides to Homer in the coma theory. A world that does not change in the ways the actual world changes, a place where the specific textures of familiarity are maintained, where Bart is always 10, and Lisa always plays saxophone and the couch is always in the same place, and Homer always makes it home by the end of the episode. This is not a trivial thing to provide. The world changes in ways that are sometimes faster and more comprehensive than the people living through those changes can fully accommodate. The things that remain consistent across the change acquire value not because they are static, but because their consistency provides a reference point, a stable ground against which the movement of everything else can be registered. Springfield has been that reference point for a significant portion of the American television-watching public across 36 years, and the stability it provides has been genuinely useful in ways that go beyond entertainment. The longtime viewer carries Springfield with them. The specific details of the show, its particular faces and voices and places and jokes, are stored in a part of memory that is more durable than the memory for most things, because they have been reinforced by repeated exposure across years of watching, and because they are associated with specific periods and circumstances of the viewer's own life in ways that make them personally resonant rather than simply retained. This is why the show, when viewed with the specific kind of attention we have brought to it tonight, feels like more than a television show. It is a text that has been accumulating personal resonance for the viewer across the full span of their engagement with it, a text that carries not just its own meanings, but the meanings of all the moments in the viewer's life that were happening around the watching of it. The details we have spent the evening finding, the signs and the music and the secondary characters and the unresolved threads and the marriage at the center and the writers in the walls and the geography that refuses to be fixed, all of these are more available to the viewer who has been carrying Springfield for a long time, because the carrying is what makes the familiarity that makes the detail findable. You cannot find what you have never been near enough to look at closely, and you are only near enough to look at something closely when you have spent enough time with it that it has stopped being unfamiliar, when it has become the kind of familiar that lets you notice things you were not specifically looking for. The Simpsons rewards the long watch. It has been built to reward the long watch, across all the details placed in its background, and all the care given to its music, and all the depth added to its characters across many seasons. It was built for the viewer who comes back, who keeps coming back, who has been coming back for years, and who finds, each time they return, that the place has been waiting and that the waiting has not been passive. The background details accumulate, building toward pictures that no single episode can reveal. The music evolves within its own traditions, while maintaining the continuity of its established themes. The characters deepen across each season's additional hours of story. The marriage grows more specific and more honest with each passing year of its depiction. The town maintains its geography and its forgetting, and its strange, specific combination of warmth and contamination, comedy and genuine sadness, familiarity and unresolvable mystery. And the viewer who has been watching all of this, who has been coming back to Springfield for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, or who is watching for the first time tonight, receives all of it at whatever frequency they are currently attuned to receive. The surface, which is enough, or the background, which is more, or the music which is operating below conscious attention in every episode, or the continuity between episodes, which is visible only to the long watch. All of it is there. All of it has been there since the beginning. All of it will be there next time. That is Springfield. That is the whole thing. Rest now. Supplemental. The animation and the invisible craft. The physical making of The Simpsons, the specific craft of animation that produces the visual experience of Springfield, contains its own layer of hidden detail and deliberate choice that is as carefully considered as any other aspect of the show's production. Animation is a medium in which everything that appears on screen is chosen, because unlike live-action production, nothing appears on screen that was not explicitly placed there. Every line, every color, every shadow, every movement of every element in every frame, all of it was a decision. This total intentionality of the animated image is both the medium's greatest gift and its greatest demand. The gift is control. The animated show can look exactly as it was designed to look, without the accidents and limitations that live-action production must accept. The demand is that the design must cover everything, that there is no such thing as background detail that was not specifically chosen, that everything in the frame is there because someone decided it would be there. The visual design choices of the early Simpsons seasons established a palette and an aesthetic that have been maintained and evolved across the show's entire history. The specific yellow of the character's skin, the specific quality of the line work, the particular relationship between characters' proportions and the proportions of their environment, all of these were established in the early seasons as the show's visual grammar and have been the foundation of its visual identity ever since. The yellow skin is the show's most immediately recognizable visual choice and one of its most discussed. Various explanations have been offered for it across the show's history, some practical and some aesthetic. The practical explanation is that yellow reads clearly across different broadcast conditions and technologies, that it is visible and distinguishable in a way that flesh-colored character design might not be across the range of televisions and display technologies the show anticipated reaching. The aesthetic explanation is that it immediately signals the show's status as cartoon rather than realistic representation, that the yellow skin is the show saying to the viewer that this is a stylized world whose visual conventions are its own. Both explanations are plausible, and the most interesting thing about them is that they are not in conflict. The choice was probably made for multiple reasons simultaneously, which is usually how the best design choices work. They serve multiple purposes at once, they are right in more than one way, they solve more than one problem with a single solution. The specific quality of the early season's animation, the particular texture of its line work, and the specific way it handled backgrounds and character movement reflects both the technical constraints of its period and the specific aesthetic choices of its lead animators. The show's early seasons were animated with a budget and a timeline that imposed limitations, and the show's visual identity was partly shaped by how its animators worked within those limitations. The specific character of the early season animation is partly the result of what was possible and partly the result of specific choices made within those constraints, and the two are inseparable in the final images. As the show's budget and production values evolved across its history, the animation changed in ways that are clearly visible to anyone who watches episodes from different periods side by side. The later seasons are smoother, more fluid, animated with a technical polish that the early seasons could not have produced. But something changed in the evolution from the early aesthetic to the later one, something that is difficult to name but that longtime viewers consistently identify as a felt difference between the visual experience of the early seasons and the visual experience of later ones. This difference is partly technological. The specific quality of the early animation is the quality of an earlier moment in the medium's technical history, and that quality is not recoverable without deliberately recreating the constraints that produced it. But the difference is also partly aesthetic. The early season's visual roughness was doing something that the later season's visual polish does not do in the same way, something about immediacy and presence, and the specific kind of visual energy that slightly imperfect animation can produce that perfect animation cannot. The storyboard process for The Simpsons, the process by which episodes are translated from written scripts into visual sequences, has been one of the most carefully managed aspects of the show's production across its history. The storyboards are the intermediate step between the written word and the animated image, the document that determines how each scene will be constructed visually, where the camera will be and what it will emphasize, and how the characters will be placed in relation to each other. The specific choices made at the storyboard stage are the choices that determine the visual intelligence of an episode, and the show has consistently employed storyboard artists and directors who understood that the visual intelligence of animation is a form of storytelling that operates independently of the dialogue and the script. A scene can be written clearly and storyboarded stupidly, and the stupidity of the storyboard will undermine the clarity of the writing. A scene can be written quickly and storyboarded brilliantly, and the brilliance of the storyboard will add a dimension to the scene that the writing did not contain. The show has always understood this and has made its visual storytelling a genuine priority rather than a technical obligation. The camera positions in the Simpsons episodes are not simply functional, not just placing the action in frame so that the viewer can follow the story. They are expressive, carrying specific visual meanings that support and extend the meanings being established in dialogue and action. A high-angle shot of Homer expresses something about his situation that the same scene shot from eye level would not. A wide shot that keeps a character small in the frame says something about their isolation that a closer framing would not. These visual choices are present throughout the show's history, more visible in some episodes and some seasons than others, but consistently present as a layer of meaning that the most attentive visual readers of the show have always received, in addition to the surface content. The color design of Springfield across the show's history is one of its most consistently maintained visual commitments. The palette of Springfield is specific. The particular quality of its exterior light, the characteristic color relationships of its interiors, the specific hues used for different types of location and different emotional registers. The Simpsons' living room is a specific orange-yellow. Moe's Tavern is a specific warm brown. The nuclear plant is specific institutional green and gray. These color identities have been maintained across the show's history with a consistency that is partly the result of the show's established style guides and partly the result of the careful attention of its art directors, color designers across many different production seasons. The exterior color of Springfield across different times of day and different seasons is another of the show's most carefully maintained visual elements. The show's color department has developed a consistent vocabulary for how Springfield looks at different hours, how the light changes from morning to afternoon to evening in the specific way it changes in a mid-American town, how different weather conditions alter the visual character of familiar locations. This vocabulary allows the show to communicate time and atmosphere through color in ways that support the narrative without requiring explicit statement. The design of Springfield's background buildings and streetscapes is one of the most extensive design achievements in the history of American animation. The show has built a complete fictional city across 36 seasons, and the architectural design of that city has been consistent enough to feel coherent while being varied enough to feel like an actual place that has been built and rebuilt and modified across many decades by many different people with many different aesthetic priorities. Springfield's architecture reflects the architectural history of American mid-sized cities. The specific combination of different eras of construction that produces the visual texture of a place that has been continuously inhabited and continuously modified across a long history. The older buildings reflect the architectural conventions of earlier American periods. The newer buildings reflect more recent conventions. The relationship between old and new architecture in Springfield streetscapes is the relationship that characterizes real American cities, not replacement but accumulation. The new built next to the old, the different eras of construction coexisting in a specific mixture that is the record of the city's history. The props that populate Springfield's locations are another category of carefully designed visual content. The show's prop design department has been producing specific objects for Springfield's locations for 36 years, and the accumulated archive of Springfield-specific props, from the food products on Quickie Mart shelves to the equipment in the nuclear plant to the books on the Simpson family's shelves, is itself an extraordinary body of design work. The best props are the ones that are exactly right, that look like they belong in the specific location where they appear, that carry the visual identity of a specific kind of object in a specific kind of context, that feel like real things from a real place rather than like designed objects from a production. The Quickie Mart products have this quality. They look like the kind of products a convenience store of Apu's specific character would carry, with the specific visual design conventions of convenience store brand products rendered in the show's visual language. They are designed objects, but they are designed to feel like found objects, to feel like things that exist in Springfield because Springfield is the kind of place they would exist rather than because a prop designer put them there. This is the highest achievement of prop design, and the show has consistently reached for it across its history. The result is a visual world that feels inhabited in the way that real places feel inhabited, that carries the visual evidence of the accumulated choices and accidents and habits that produce a genuine lived-in quality, rather than the polished emptiness of spaces that were designed to be used rather than to feel used. The character animation, the specific quality of how the characters move and gesture and respond physically to their situations, is one of the show's most consistent achievements and one of its least discussed. The Simpsons characters move in specific ways that are consistent with who they are. Homer moves the way someone of his specific physical character and cognitive relationship to his body would move. Marge moves with the specific quality of a woman whose habitual posture and gesture reflect decades of managing a household and the expectations placed on her within it. Lisa moves with the energy of someone who is always slightly too large for the spaces she is in, whose intelligence and feeling keep overflowing whatever container the situation provides. These specific qualities of character movement are the result of the sustained attention of the show's character animators across many seasons. Animators who understood that movement is character and that the specific way a person moves tells you who they are as clearly as anything they say. The character animation of The Simpsons is, at its best, as specific and accurate and revealing as the best character writing, and the two are inseparable in the finished episodes that produce the show's most complete characters. The visual gags of The Simpsons, the jokes that exist purely in the image rather than in the dialogue, are one of the show's most distinctively cinematic achievements. Animation allows visual gags of a kind and complexity that live-action production cannot easily produce, and the show has taken full advantage of this capacity across its history. The specific absurdity of certain visual configurations, the specific comedy of characters in improbable spatial relationships, the visual puns and visual callbacks and visual surprises that the show deploys throughout its episodes. All of these are the work of animators who understood that a frame of animation can be a joke in itself, that the image can be doing comedy that is not in any script. The relationship between the visual gags and the dialogue-based comedy in The Simpsons has been one of the show's most carefully managed balancing acts. The two modes of comedy can support each other, can run in parallel, can operate at different frequencies for different parts of the audience. The dialogue comedy is available to everyone who hears it. The visual comedy is available to everyone who is watching. And the comedy that happens in the intersection of the two, where what is said and what is seen are doing different things that combine into something funnier than either alone, is available to the viewer who is paying attention to both simultaneously. This is the comedy of maximum compression, of the joke that uses every available channel simultaneously, and The Simpsons has been doing it across 36 years in ways that have produced some of the densest comedy in the history of the medium. The show's relationship to time within episodes, the specific way it constructs its 22 minutes to feel like the right amount of time for what is happening in them, is another of its less discussed achievements. 22 minutes is a specific and demanding format, long enough to establish something, short enough to require economy in everything that is established. The show has developed across its history a mastery of this format that is visible in the specific pacing of its best episodes, in the way each scene is given exactly the amount of time it requires and not more, in the way the episode builds across its running time toward a conclusion that feels arrived at rather than imposed. The timing of comedy in animation is different from the timing of comedy in live performance because animation can control time more precisely. The pause can be exactly as long as needed. The physical reaction can arrive at exactly the right moment. The show has used this control throughout its history, and the specific timing of its best visual and verbal comedy is part of what makes it as funny as it is. The gap between the setup and the punchline can be calculated rather than estimated. The animator can place the punchline image at the exact frame that makes it funnier than the surrounding frames. This precision of comic timing is one of the things that makes animation a uniquely suited medium for certain kinds of comedy, and The Simpsons has exploited it consistently and well. The result is comedy that is calibrated more precisely than most live-action comedy can be, that lands with a consistency that reflects the specific advantage of animated timing over performed timing. All of this, the color and the animation and the props and the visual gags and the timing, all of it exists beneath the threshold of what most viewers consciously track when they watch the show. It is received, processed, responded to. The comedy lands The emotions are felt. The world feels right. But the specific craft that produces those responses operates below attention in the way that all the best craft operates, invisibly, in service of an experience that seems to arrive without effort because the effort has been perfectly concealed. The show has been doing this invisible work for 36 years. And the invisible work is the real achievement. Supplemental, the voice and the character. There is a specific thing that happens when a voice performer inhabits a character for long enough that the voice becomes inseparable from the character in the listener's imagination. The voice stops being a performance of the character and becomes the character's actual voice in the most complete sense. The voice that the character has always had and will always have, the voice that no other performer could provide without the character becoming someone else. This has happened with every main character in The Simpsons across 36 years of voice work, and it is one of the most remarkable achievements of the show's casting and its sustained relationship with those original voice performers across the full span of the show's history. Dan Castellaneta's Homer is so completely Homer that imagining Homer with any other voice is not simply difficult, but is a kind of conceptual impossibility. Homer's voice is a specific instrument with a specific emotional range that has been developed across thousands of hours of performance across 3.5 decades, and the range is now so fully established that Castellaneta can communicate Homer's entire emotional spectrum with the kind of precision that only comes from deep and sustained knowledge of a character. The specific quality of Homer's voice is worth attention. It is not a naturalistic voice, not a reproduction of how someone who looked and acted like Homer would actually sound. It is an animated voice, a voice that is doing something different from naturalistic performance, that is finding the emotional truth of the character through a kind of heightened expression that is specific to animation. The comedy in Homer's voice, the specific texture of his confusion and his enthusiasm and his pain and his tenderness and his stupidity and his occasional sharp clarity is animation comedy rather than realist comedy, operating in the space between caricature and genuine feeling that is animation's specific emotional register. The same is true of Yeardley Smith's Lisa, which is one of the most technically demanding sustained voice performances in the history of American animation. Lisa's voice must carry genuine intelligence, genuine feeling, genuine isolation, and genuine hope in proportions that shift across different scenes and different seasons, and it must do all of this in the heightened register of animation while maintaining the emotional consistency that makes Lisa feel real rather than performed. Smith has done this for 36 years with a consistency and a care that is the invisible foundation of everything the show has built with its most complex main character. Julie Kavner's Marge is the voice performance that most clearly demonstrates the difference between a voice that is right and a voice that is merely adequate. Marge's voice is specific in a way that is immediately recognizable as the right voice for the character. The particular quality of its warmth and its underlying tension, the specific way it sounds when Marge is managing something difficult with the patient efficiency that is her characteristic mode, the way it changes when the management becomes too much and the tension breaks through. These qualities are not incidental to the performance, but are the performance, are the specific character expression that the voice carries. Nancy Cartwright's Bart has maintained across 36 years the specific quality of a voice that is doing something technically unusual, performing a 10-year-old boy's voice in a register that is immediately recognizable as Bart, while also being versatile enough to carry the full range of what Bart is across many different emotional and narrative contexts. The voice is consistent across the full span of its history, while the performance inside the voice has deepened and become more precise as Cartwright's understanding of the character has deepened across decades of inhabiting him. The consistency of these voice performances across the show's entire history is one of its most important continuities, more fundamental than any continuity of plot or character or setting. The voices are what make Springfield feel like a continuous place rather than a set of disconnected episodes, what allow the viewer to move between seasons, separated by many years of real time, and still recognize the characters as themselves rather than as different versions of themselves. The consistency of the voices is what makes the show's floating timeline emotionally sustainable. The characters may not age, but the voices that give them life have been aging right alongside the audience, accumulating the specific weight of long knowledge of these characters in the same way that the audience has been accumulating long knowledge of them. The voice performers have been together with their characters for so long that the boundary between performance and identity has become permeable in ways that are difficult to specify but easy to feel. Dan Castellaneta does not simply perform Homer. He is, in some specific sense, the only person who is Homer, because Homer does not exist without Castellaneta's voice, and Castellaneta's voice is now so thoroughly associated with Homer that it has become a different thing in his throat than whatever it was before Homer existed. This is the specific alchemy of sustained voice performance across a long period. The performer and the character achieve a form of mutual definition that makes separating them conceptually difficult. Homer is the character, but Homer is also the specific quality of Castellaneta's vocal instrument applied to that character across 36 years of episodes. These two things are now the same thing, and the sameness is one of the most quietly miraculous achievements of the show's sustained relationship with its original cast. The secondary voice performers of The Simpsons, the actors who provide voices for multiple characters across the show's history, have their own form of this sustained achievement. Hank Azaria, before his departure from certain roles, inhabited an extraordinary range of Springfield characters across the show's history, each with its own specific vocal identity and emotional range, creating a one-person repertory company's worth of character performance within the framework of a single show. Harry Shearer has done the same, maintaining the specific vocal identities of characters as different as Burns and Ned Flanders and Skinner across the full span of the show's history, with the consistency and care of a performer who understands that these characters deserve the same sustained attention as any character he would play in a more prestigious context. The guest performances in the show, the voices provided by people who have come to Springfield for single episodes or brief arcs, achieve their specific quality through a different mechanism than the sustained performances of the main cast. The guest voice performance must establish a character in a compressed amount of time, must find the specific identity of a character who will not have the benefit of seasons of development to become themselves, must make someone real and specific in the span of a single episode's worth of recording. The best guest performances in The Simpsons achieve this compression with a clarity and precision that is its own form of artistry. The guest who arrives with a specific understanding of the character they are playing, who brings their own specific vocal qualities to bear on the character with intelligence and care, who finds the specific register that makes the character feel like a genuine Springfield resident rather than a visitor, produces a performance that enlarges the show's world rather than simply populating it. The voice recording process of The Simpsons has always been unusual in American animation for the degree to which it allows the voice performers to contribute to the development of their characters in the recording studio. The performers are not simply executing scripts, they are participants in the process of discovering what the characters would actually say, of finding in the act of performing the specific words that are more right than the written words, of adding the improvised detail or the specific vocal quality that transforms a written line into a character's actual voice. This collaborative process, conducted across 36 years of recording sessions, is part of what gives the show's characters the specific quality of genuine personhood rather than scripted construction. Characters who are invented by their performers as well as by their writers have a dimension that purely scripted characters often lack. The dimension of the performer's own understanding of who the character is, their own contribution to the character's specific texture and identity, their own version of the character that exists in the space between the script and the recording. The accumulated recordings across the show's history are, in one sense, the most complete archive of what these characters are, more complete than any description or analysis could produce, because they are the characters in their own voices, saying the specific things they say in the specific ways they say them across 36 years of episodes. The archive is enormous, and the accumulated length of the character performances it contains is one of the most extraordinary bodies of character work in the history of American storytelling. And all of it is available, in the way that everything about The Simpsons is available, to anyone who brings to it the specific quality of attention that discovers what is there when you look closely. The attention that finds the joke on the small bottle in the background of the Quickie Mart. The attention that hears what Lisa is actually playing on her saxophone. The attention that notices what Homer's filing cabinet says about who he is. The attention that finds, in the accumulated work of thousands of people across 36 years, something that was placed there specifically for the person patient enough to look. That is you. You have been that person tonight. And Springfield, as always, was glad you came. Supplemental. On watching in the dark. There is something particular about watching anything in the dark, in the specific condition that most people who are watching this kind of content find themselves in when they encounter it. The room is dim. The screen provides the primary light source. The body is arranged for comfort rather than alertness. The conditions favor a specific mode of reception that is different from what most media is designed for, and that is more open, in certain ways, to what long-form, unhurried content like this has to offer. In the dark, with the body comfortable and the room quiet, attention changes its character. It becomes less directed, less purposeful, less organized around the specific goal of extracting specific information from a specific source in the minimum possible time. It becomes more receptive, more open to what is arriving rather than focused on finding what it came for. The kind of listening and receiving that happens in the dark is the kind that is most available to the slow accumulation of detail, to the building of pictures from fragments, to the relaxed absorption of information that the wide-awake analytic mind would need to actively process. The Simpsons, as a subject for this specific mode of content, is unusual in the best possible way. It is familiar enough that the viewer does not need to hold an enormous amount of new context in working memory, does not need to track unfamiliar characters or follow complex, newly established plot lines. The characters are known, the world is known, the baseline is in place. What we have spent the evening doing is adding to a baseline that was already there, finding detail and depth and connection in a world the viewer already carries, adding to something rather than building from nothing. This mode of discovery, the discovery of what is already partially known, has a specific and comfortable quality that is well suited to the hour and the condition. You are not arriving somewhere new tonight. You have been here before. What has been different tonight is the quality of attention you have brought to a familiar place, the willingness to slow down and look at what is in the background, to listen to what the music is doing underneath the dialogue, to trace the threads of connection that run between episodes and across seasons, and through the long history of a show you have been watching for some portion of your life. What you carry with you from this specific evening in Springfield is yours specifically. The details that landed for you, that produced the specific quality of recognition or discovery or gentle surprise, those are yours, matched to your own history with the show, your own memories of the episodes and the characters, and the specific moments that have stayed with you across however many years you have been watching. The Simpsons is different for each viewer who has carried it for any significant length of time, because what each viewer carries is the intersection of the show's content and their own history, the specific version of Springfield that they have assembled from years of watching in specific contexts, with specific histories and specific emotional states. The Springfield I have been describing tonight is the Springfield of an observer who has paid close attention across many years. Your Springfield is the Springfield you have built across your own years of watching, and the details that resonated most for you tonight are the details that found something already present in your version of the place. This is the deepest magic of a long-running show, and it is difficult to articulate without making it sound more mystical than it is. It is not mystical. It is simply the natural consequence of what happens when human beings invest sustained attention in a shared fictional world across a significant portion of their lives. The shared world accumulates personal resonance. The details of the world become associated with moments and feelings from the viewer's own life. The characters become people the viewer has known for years, in the specific way you know characters you have followed across that span of time, which is different from, but genuinely parallel to the way you know people in your actual life. Homer Simpson has been in more people's lives for longer than most of the people those people actually know. He has been a constant across periods of significant change. His specific quality of endearing failure and genuine love has accompanied people through their own failures and their own love across decades of watching. And the specific content of the show, all the detail and craft and care we have been discussing tonight, is the substance of what those years of company have contained. Springfield has been built with the understanding that people would spend years of their lives visiting it. The care in its background details, the depth in its characters, the music that has been scoring its scenes for 36 years, the marriage at its center that has been honestly and specifically depicted across that entire span. All of this was built for a visitor who would return many times, who would carry the accumulated context of each previous visit to the next one, who would find, each time they returned, that the care put into the place rewarded the care they brought to visiting it. You have been that visitor tonight? The details are there for you when you go back. The music will be doing its specific work in every episode you watch. The marriage will be what it has always been. Two people, specifically themselves, choosing each other with the specific persistence of people who have found in each other something that survives the long accumulation of everything. And the background will be full of the right things. Exactly the right things. The small bottle with the label that nobody was supposed to read. The marquee with the commentary on the scene happening in front of it. The books that reveal the family in their own library. The mathematical problem on the school chalkboard whose solution nobody expected anyone to work. All of it waiting in the background of the episodes you already know and the episodes you have not seen yet, patient and specific and placed there for the viewer who would slow down long enough to find them. That is the show. That is what it has always been. An enormous, extraordinary, improbably sustained act of care for an audience that has been returning to it for 36 years. Thank you for spending the evening here. Rest now. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. A final word from Springfield. There is one more thing worth saying before we let the silence take over completely. One more thing that ties together everything we have spent this long evening discussing. One more thread that connects all the others into a single coherent statement about what The Simpsons is and what it has been doing for 36 years, without ever quite saying it directly. The show has been built on the understanding that the people watching it are intelligent and attentive and capable of receiving more than what is obvious. Not in a flattering or condescending way, not in the way of a show that congratulates its audience for being smart enough to watch it. In the more honest way of a show that simply proceeds on the assumption that its audience is worth the full effort, that the background detail and the careful music and the deep characterization and the long continuity are worthwhile, because the people watching are the kind of people who will eventually notice them and be glad they are there. This assumption has been borne out. The people who have watched The Simpsons carefully enough to find what it has hidden in its background, who have listened to its music carefully enough to hear what it is doing, who have followed its characters across enough seasons to see the patterns of their development, who have paid attention to the marriage at the show's center closely enough to see what it actually is. These people exist. They have been watching. They have been finding the things the show placed in the background for them. They have been receiving the care that the show has brought to every episode across 36 years, and they have been returning it with the specific loyalty that comes from knowing a place well and finding it worthy of being known. You are among them. Whatever else this evening has been, you have spent it in the company of something made with genuine care by people who believed the care was worthwhile. That is not a small thing. Most of what fills our hours is not made with that quality of care. Most of what fills our screens is built for speed and volume, and the quick capture of attention rather than for the slow accumulation of the kind of understanding we have been building tonight. The Simpsons, for all its comedy and its chaos and its 36 years of impossible survival in an industry that eats, shows, and spits out their bones, has always been made with care. The care is in the small bottle label in the background of the quick E-Mart. It is in the music that scored the scene you happened to be watching when you needed it most. It is in the marriage between two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other across an extraordinary amount of story. It is in the background of every episode, waiting for the specific kind of attention that notices it. You have brought that attention tonight. Springfield received it. Now rest. The couch is comfortable, the television is on, the family is home. And Springfield, as always, is right outside the window. Yellow-skinned and impossible and specific and strange and completely, entirely itself. Good night.